Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been a hunter all my life. My dad taught me to track, shoot, and respect the wilderness when I was just 10 years old. I've spent countless seasons in the woods of Washington State, and I thought I understood what was out there. But after what happened to me in Colville National Forest back in early October 2014, I don't think I'll ever feel the same about those woods again. I'd been planning this solo hunting trip for months. I needed to get away from everything: work stress, relationship problems, just life in general. Tiger. Washington is pretty remote to begin with, but I wanted to go deeper into the backcountry than I'd ever gone before. I remember feeling excited as I drove up that old logging road, thinking about how I'd finally have real solitude for a few days. The first thing that struck me when I started setting up camp was how quiet everything was. I mean, forests are never truly silent, but this was different. Usually you hear birds calling, squirrels chattering, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. That day there was just nothing. Just the wind moving through the pines and my own breathing. I told myself it was probably just the weather changing or something. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to that warning sign. I spent the first couple days scouting the area, looking for deer signs and getting the lay of the land. I didn't see much. A few old tracks, some droppings, but not the kind of activity I'd expect for early October. The second night, I remember waking up around 3 in the morning to what sounded like something large moving through the forest, maybe a quarter-mile from my camp. I figured it was probably an elk and went back to sleep, but now I'm not so sure. The third day is when everything changed. I woke up early, ate a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal, and decided to push farther into the backcountry than I had the previous days. I was determined to find where the deer were hiding. The morning air had that crisp October feel to it, just cold enough that I could see my breath. The leaves were turning, and everything was beautiful in that melancholy fall way. I hiked for about 2 hours, moving deeper into the forest than I'd originally planned. The terrain got rougher, with rocky outcroppings and denser underbrush. I was careful to mark my trail, breaking small branches in a pattern I'd recognize on the way back. Around 10 in the morning, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. There was this stretch of forest floor where the moss and underbrush had been disturbed. At first glance, it looked like a bear had been through there, but something felt off about it. I knelt down to examine the impressions more carefully. They were footprints, but not like any I'd seen before. Too big for a black bear, and the spacing was all wrong. They were spaced too far apart, almost like human footprints, but massive, easily 17 or 18 inches long and incredibly wide. My heart started beating faster, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just water runoff that had created unusual patterns. Maybe multiple animals had passed through and created overlapping tracks. But the more I looked, the more certain I became that these were individual footprints from something bipedal and enormous. I had my phone with me, but the battery was low, and I was saving it for emergencies. I wish now I'd taken photos, but honestly, I don't think I need them to remember what those impressions looked like. They're burned into my memory. Something compelled me to follow the tracks. I know, stupid move, right? But I'd been hunting these woods for years, and I'd never seen anything like this. Call it curiosity or just plain stubbornness, but I had to know what had made those prints. I followed them for about 15 minutes, moving slowly and carefully, my rifle ready. The tracks led me toward a rocky slope, and then just like that, they disappeared. It was as if whatever made them had simply vanished, or maybe knew exactly where to step to avoid leaving more signs. I stood there for a long time, scanning the area, but couldn't pick up the trail again. I decided to head back to camp. The whole thing had unsettled me, and I figured I'd pack up and maybe move to a different area the next day. The sun was already starting to lower in the sky as I made my way back. Time passes differently in the forest, and I realized I'd spent longer following those tracks than I'd intended. I was maybe half a mile from my camp when it happened. The forest, which had been eerily quiet all day, somehow got even quieter. It was like everything around me was holding its breath. I stopped walking and just listened. Nothing, not even the wind in the trees. And then I heard it, a deep, rumbling growl coming from the trees to my left. My first thought was bear, but immediately I knew that wasn't right. I've encountered black bears before, and I know what they sound like. This was deeper, more resonant, almost like it was coming from something with a much larger chest cavity, and it didn't sound random. It felt directed at me, like a warning. I froze. My rifle was slung over my shoulder, but something told me not to reach for it. Instead, I slowly turned toward the source of the sound. What I saw standing there about 30 yards away, partially hidden behind a group of fir trees, is something I still struggle to describe. Not because I don't remember it clearly, I do with terrifying detail, but because it doesn't fit into any category of animal I've ever known. It was enormous, 9 feet tall at least, maybe taller. Its body was covered in thick black hair, not fur like a bear, but something more like human hair, just longer and coarser. The build was powerfully muscular, with a broad chest and shoulders that tapered to a narrower waist. Its arms were proportionally longer than a human's, hanging down past its knees. But it was the face that paralyzed me with fear. It wasn't an animal's face, not exactly. It was almost like a primitive human face, but with a wide, flat nose and deep-set eyes under a pronounced brow ridge. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, awareness. It was looking at me, studying me, assessing me. When our eyes met, it growled again, louder this time. The sound seemed to vibrate through my entire body. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It reached forward with one of those long arms and grabbed a small pine tree, not a branch, but an entire young tree maybe 4 inches thick, and shook it violently back and forth. The display of strength was unmistakable. It was showing me what it could do. I have never felt smaller or more vulnerable than I did in that moment. I had my rifle, but I knew instinctively that reaching for it would be a fatal mistake. Whatever this thing was, it was watching my every move, and I sensed that any aggressive action on my part would trigger an immediate response. So I started backing away, slowly, deliberately, never taking my eyes off it. For each step I took backward, it took a step to the side, maintaining the distance between us, but clearly tracking my movement. I could hear its footsteps, heavy enough to snap branches and twigs underfoot. The sound alone conveyed its massive weight. As I backed away, I noticed how it moved, fluid and natural, not clumsy or awkward like a bear walking on its hind legs. It moved like it belonged in that forest more than I ever could, like it knew every tree, every rock, every shadow. The growling never stopped. It was continuous, rumbling deep in its chest. Not the rage-filled roar of an attacking predator, but something more controlled, restrained, like it was holding itself back. That somehow made it more terrifying. This wasn't an animal reacting on instinct. This was a being making decisions. I kept backing up until I reached a small ridge that finally broke our line of sight. Even then, I didn't turn around for another 50 yards or so. When I finally did, I moved as quickly as I could without running back toward my camp. I've never been so aware of every sound in the forest as I was during that walk. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every rustle in the underbrush spiked my heart rate. By some miracle, I made it back to camp just as dusk was settling in. I briefly considered packing up right then and leaving, but it would have been dark soon, and I didn't like the idea of trying to navigate those trails at night. especially if that thing was out there somewhere. So I built the biggest fire I could and positioned myself with my back to it, rifle across my lap. I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. Throughout that entire night, I heard things moving in the forest around me, branches breaking in the distance. Strange vocalizations that weren't quite animal, but definitely weren't human either. Sort of like wood knocking against wood, followed by what almost sounded like low, mumbled speech, but too distant to make out clearly. Around 2 in the morning, something large circled my camp, just beyond the firelight. I never saw it clearly, just glimpses of movement in the darkness, but I could feel its presence. It felt like it was testing my boundaries, seeing how I would react. I stayed perfectly still, my hands shaking on my rifle. Just before dawn, there was a series of howls from far off in the forest that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They weren't wolf howls. I've heard plenty of those. These were deeper, longer, almost with a language-like quality to them. More disturbingly, they were answered by similar calls from a different direction. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up my gear faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't bother with breakfast or coffee. I didn't care about making noise. I just wanted out of there. The hike back to my truck was the longest of my life. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, jumping at every sound. I never saw the creature again, but the whole way back, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, followed at a distance. When I finally reached my truck and got inside, I sat there for a long time, hands shaking too badly to put the key in the ignition. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I've spent countless hours in the wilderness. I know what bears look like, what elk sound like, what cougar tracks look like. This wasn't any of those. What I saw that day was something that shouldn't exist according to everything I've been taught. It moved like a man, but was built like nothing human. It had awareness, intelligence, purpose. It wasn't just some animal reacting to a threat. It was communicating with me, warning me. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows, and a couple close hunting buddies. But that's it. Most people would think I'm crazy, or that I was seeing things after too many days alone in the woods. But I know what I saw. I've done research since then, read accounts from other hunters, hikers, campers who've had similar experiences. There are more of us out there than you'd think. People who've encountered something in the deep woods that defies explanation. I still hunt, but never alone anymore. And I've never gone back to that part of Colville National Forest. Some places I've come to believe aren't meant for us. Some parts of the wilderness still belong to something else, something that was there long before us. I don't know what to call what I saw that day. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever, the name doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's real, it's intelligent, and it didn't want me there, and I respect that now more than ever. Indeed, the story too. So, I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It's been 16 years now, but sometimes it feels like it happened yesterday. I still wake up in cold sweats, hearing those sounds, seeing those eyes. My wife Sarah thinks it's better not to talk about it, to just try to forget. But how do you forget something that changes your whole life? It was August 2007. We were camping near Greenwater, Washington, not far from the old Natchez Trail. I'd been taking my family camping there for years. Sarah and our 2 kids, Emma, who was 11 then, and Tyler, who was 8. We loved getting away from everything. No phones, no TV, just us and nature. We were pretty experienced campers, knew the area well, respected the wilderness. At least we thought we did. This trip, I decided to find us a more secluded spot. The main campgrounds were always getting more crowded each year, and I wanted that real wilderness feeling, you know. So I took this unmarked dirt road I'd spotted on previous trips. It was rough going in our pickup, but we found this perfect little clearing about 2 miles in, surrounded by these massive old-growth trees. You could barely see the sky through the canopy. The kids were thrilled. It felt like our own private forest. We set up camp like we always did. 2 tents, one for Sarah and me, one for the kids. Got our fire pit going, set up the coolers, hung our food in a tree away from the campsite, bears, you know. Everything was textbook perfect. That first night was beautiful. Clear, cool, stars peeking through the trees. We roasted marshmallows, told stories, fell asleep to the sound of wind in the trees. The second day was great too. We hiked a nearby trail in the morning, ate lunch by a stream where the kids splashed around. It was one of those perfect days that remind you why you love the outdoors. We got back to camp as the sun was starting to go down, started the fire, began cooking dinner. That's when things changed. I was turning hot dogs on the portable grill when I first heard it. Branches breaking, something moving in the underbrush maybe 50 yards away. Didn't think much of it initially. Could have been anything, deer, raccoon, whatever. But then I noticed it wasn't random. The sounds were deliberate, like something walking slowly, stopping, starting again, circling us. "You hear that?" Sarah whispered. She was setting up paper plates on the picnic table, but had gone completely still. I nodded, trying not to alarm the kids who were playing some card game by the fire. "Probably just a deer," I said, but I didn't believe it. Deer don't move like that. The footsteps got heavier, slower, more purposeful. Whatever it was big, and it was circling our camp, staying just inside the tree line. The sun was almost down now, and our fire cast this bubble of light that made the surrounding forest seem even darker. Emma noticed it next. "Dad," she said, voice tight, "there's something out there." "It's okay, Em. Wild animals are more scared of us than we are of them," I said, but my hand was already reaching for the flashlight. I stood up, aimed the beam toward where the last sound had come from. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But the second I moved the light, I heard it again from a different spot, like whatever it was had moved the moment I looked away. "Everyone stay close to the fire," I said, grabbing my rifle from the truck. I always brought it camping, never thought I'd need it for anything but maybe firing a warning shot if we ran into an aggressive bear. The kids huddled next to Sarah by the fire. I could see they were scared now, even Tyler, who usually acted so tough. I circled the campsite with my flashlight, scanning the trees. Every time I'd hear a sound from one direction and point the light there, it would stop immediately, then start up somewhere else, just beyond where my light could reach. This went on for maybe 20 minutes. Then the sounds stopped completely. We sat in silence, listening, nothing but the crack of our fire. "Maybe it went away," Tyler whispered. I wanted to believe that. We tried to go back to normal, eat our dinner, but nobody had much appetite. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It was like the forest had eyes. As it got darker, I made a decision. "Everyone in the tents tonight, earlier than usual. Sarah, take the kids. I'll keep watch for a while. Make sure whatever it was is really gone." Sarah looked at me with those eyes, the ones that said she knew I wasn't telling her everything. "James, if you think there's danger, it's just precaution," I cut her off, glancing at the kids. "Go on, get settled. I'll be right out here." After they zipped up in their tents, I sat by the fire, rifle across my lap, flashlight in hand. I kept scanning the trees, listening. For a while there was nothing. Then, around midnight, I heard it. Not footsteps this time. A grunt, deep, guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It came from about 50 feet away, past this massive Douglas fir at the edge of our clearing. My blood went cold. I stood up slowly, raised my flashlight, and that's when I saw it step out from behind the tree. God, I wish I could say it was just a bear. That's what I tried to tell myself for a split second. But bears don't stand 8 feet tall. Bears don't have that silhouette. This thing was massive. Broad shoulders, long arms, standing upright on 2 legs. The light caught its body, covered in thick reddish-brown hair. Not fur, hair, except for parts of its face and what looked like its palms. Its eyes caught the firelight, small, deep-set, intelligent. They fixed on me with an intensity that froze me in place. This wasn't an animal looking at me. There was something knowing in those eyes. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably just seconds. Then it made this sound, not quite a roar, more like a deep, rumbling growl that I felt in my chest more than heard. Without warning, it bent down and picked up a fallen log. Must have been at least 4 feet long and thick as my thigh. With one fluid motion, it hurled it toward our camp. The log slammed into the side of my truck with a crash that echoed through the clearing. The dent it left was almost a foot deep. That broke my trance. I yelled for Sarah, for the kids. "Get up! Get to the truck! Now!" The creature roared, an actual roar this time. The sound was deafening, primal. It echoed off the trees and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sarah burst from our tent, her face white with fear. "What's happening?" "Get the kids! Get to the truck!" I was screaming, moving backward toward the tents, trying to keep my eyes and the rifle pointed at the creature. Emma and Tyler were already scrambling out, awakened by the noise. Tyler was crying. Emma was silent with shock. Sarah grabbed them both and ran for the truck. I backed up, keeping myself between the creature and my family. It watched us, not charging yet, but it didn't retreat either. It let out another of those deep growls and took a step forward. We all piled into the truck, locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the keys. The kids were in the back seat, Tyler sobbing, Emma just staring straight ahead, completely silent. The creature didn't leave. It circled the truck now, just like it had circled our campsite earlier. I could hear its heavy breathing, see its massive shadow moving past the windows. Then it slapped the driver's side panel, hard enough to rock the entire truck. Sarah screamed. The kids were hysterical now. It moved to the back of the truck and struck the rear window with enough force to crack the glass in a spiderweb pattern. That's when I got the engine started. I threw it in reverse, then drive and hit the gas. As we started moving, the creature picked up a rock, had to be at least 20 pounds, and hurled it at us. It hit the tailgate with a sound like a gunshot. I kept driving, tires spinning on the dirt road, branches slapping the sides of the truck. In the rearview mirror, I could see it following us to the edge of the clearing. It was throwing things after us, our firewood, branches, another rock that hit the roof with a sickening thud. I drove like a madman down that rough road, not slowing down for anything, bottoming out more than once. Nobody said a word. We were all in shock. I didn't stop until we hit the main highway. And even then, I kept checking the mirrors, convinced I'd see that thing emerging from the trees behind us. We drove straight home that night, left all our camping gear behind except what was in the truck. 5 hours on the road in complete silence, except for the occasional sob from the back seat. When we got home, the physical evidence was right there on our truck. A massive dent in the side panel, scratch marks along the doors that no bear could have made, a cracked rear window, and another dent in the roof and tailgate. These weren't minor dings. The side panel dent was so deep it cost nearly $2,000 to repair. Sarah wouldn't talk about it. Still won't really. She just says it was a bear encounter if anyone asks why we don't go camping anymore. The kids were messed up for a long time. Tyler had nightmares for months, would wake up screaming about the monster in the trees. Emma developed this intense fear of forests. She used to love hiking with me. After that night, she wouldn't even walk in the wooded park near our house. As for me, I can't stop seeing those eyes when I close my own. Intelligent, aware, whatever that thing was, it wasn't just some animal. It was calculating. It knew exactly what it was doing. Circling us, testing our defenses, intimidating us. And when it threw that log at the truck, it was sending a message. Get out. This is my territory. I've read about Sasquatch encounters since then, tried to make sense of what we saw. Most stories describe them as shy, reclusive creatures that avoid human contact. But this one was aggressive, territorial. Maybe we unknowingly camped in its space. Maybe it had had run-ins with humans before. I don't know. What I do know is that we used to be a family that lived for our outdoor adventures, weekend hikes, camping trips every summer, fishing, exploring. That thing took all of that from us in one night. The kids are grown now, but neither of them will go camping. Tyler won't even go to outdoor music festivals if they're in wooded areas. Emma went to therapy for years. Sarah and I haven't slept in separate rooms since that night, not even once. Something about being alone in the dark. It brings it all back. Sometimes I think about going back there just to prove to myself that I can, to reclaim something that was taken from us. But then I remember those eyes, that roar, the way it hurled that log like it weighed nothing. And I know I never will. I don't expect everyone to believe this. Hell, sometimes I wake up and try to convince myself it was just a bear, that fear magnified everything. But then I remember how it moved, how it watched us, the intelligence in those eyes. And I know there are things in those woods that most people will never see, and maybe that's for the best. Because once you've seen them, you can never unsee them, and you never feel safe in the wilderness again. It's been 16 years, and I still jump at unexpected sounds in the dark. I still can't sleep with the window open, and I still wonder if somewhere in those woods near Greenwater, that thing remembers us too. Story 3. I've been debating whether to share this for years, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm still trying to process what happened to me back in May 2019, and I honestly don't know if writing about it will help or just bring back the nightmares. But here goes. I used to love hiking alone. There's something about being by yourself in nature that just resets your brain, you know? No phone notifications, no conversations, just you and your thoughts. The Olympic Peninsula has always been my favorite spot. I live about 2 hours away, so it's close enough for day trips. That Thursday in May, I had taken a personal day off work. Spring had been stressful. I was dealing with a big project deadline and hadn't had much time outdoors. The forecast showed clear weather, which is basically a miracle for the Olympic Peninsula, so I decided to take advantage. I packed a small day pack with water, some trail mix, a couple protein bars, and my camera. Nothing fancy, just the basics for an afternoon hike. I arrived at the Ho Rainforest Visitor Center around 4:30 p.m. Most people were already leaving since the park closes at dusk, but there were still a few cars in the lot. I remember nodding to an older couple loading up their SUV as I grabbed my gear. The ranger at the entrance reminded me about the closing time and suggested sticking to the main trail since I was starting late. I thanked him, but had already planned my route. There's a less traveled path that branches off the main trail about a mile in, following a creek bend. I'd been there before, and it's gorgeous. Massive moss-covered trees, that incredible green light filtering through the canopy, and hardly any people. I set off at a good pace. The main trail was empty except for a few hikers heading back to their cars. Once I reached the fork, I took the path along the creek. After about 30 minutes of hiking, I found myself completely alone. The only sounds were birds, the gentle rush of water, and my own breathing. Perfect. Around 6 p.m. I found a nice spot near the water to take a break. There was this fallen log that made a perfect natural bench, and the creek widened at that point, creating these beautiful ripples as it flowed over some smooth rocks. I sat down, pulled out a protein bar and some trail mix, and just breathed. The forest was unbelievably peaceful. The mist had settled in parts of the forest, giving it that mystical quality the Ho is known for. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this moment to myself. That's when I first heard it, a distinct slapping sound coming from upstream. At first, I thought it was a beaver. They're common enough in these parts, and that tail slap is pretty distinctive. But as I listened more carefully, I realized this was different. It wasn't the sharp crack of a beaver tail. It was slower, heavier, more deliberate. Slap, pause, slap, pause. Almost like someone was hitting the water with something solid. My curiosity got the better of me. I put my snacks back in my bag and stood up, peering upstream to try to spot the source. The creek bent around a cluster of large trees about 50 feet ahead, blocking my view. I decided to walk closer, staying on my side of the creek. I moved quietly, not because I was trying to be stealthy, but because that's just how I hike. I don't like disturbing wildlife if I can help it. As I got closer to the bend, the slapping sounds continued, and I could now hear what sounded like water being moved around, like someone was searching for something beneath the surface. When I reached the bend and could finally see around it, I froze. There, across the creek, was something I still struggled to describe. A massive creature was crouched at the water's edge, its back to me. At first glance, I thought it might be a bear. We have plenty of black bears in the area, and even the occasional grizzly. But this wasn't a bear. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy hair, soaking wet and hanging down like wet fur does. But the proportions were all wrong for a bear. Its arms were impossibly long and muscular, extended into the water where it appeared to be feeling around for something, maybe fish. Those arms were what had been creating the slapping sound as they broke the water's surface. I stood there, completely frozen, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The creature was focused on whatever it was doing in the water, unaware of my presence. I remember having this bizarre moment of clarity where I thought I should take a picture, but my body refused to move. Something primal in me knew that any movement would be dangerous, and then I screwed up. I took a small step backwards, and my heel came down on a dry branch. The crack seemed to echo through the forest like a gunshot. The creature went completely still. Then slowly, it turned its massive head towards me. There was a moment, just a single heartbeat, where our eyes met, and I knew I was in serious trouble. It stood up. God, I'll never forget watching it rise. In one smooth motion, it went from crouching to standing upright on two legs. My brain kept trying to categorize it. Bear, person in a suit, some kind of elaborate prank. But there was no denying what I was seeing. This thing had to be at least 8.5 feet tall. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, easily twice the width of mine, with a massive chest that tapered to a more narrow waist. The hair on its body was dripping water, and I could see clumps of mud around its legs. But its face, that's what haunts me the most. It wasn't a bear's face or anything close to human. It was almost like a primitive human face, but flatter, heavier, with a pronounced brow ridge and a wide, flat nose. When it saw me, it opened its mouth, revealing teeth that seemed too large, and let out a sound that I felt more than heard, a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through my chest. I've heard bear growls before while hiking. This was nothing like that. It was deeper, more intentional. There was intelligence behind that sound and unmistakable aggression. The creature took a deliberate step toward the creek, never breaking eye contact with me. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It reached up with one massive arm, grabbed a branch from a nearby tree, a branch thicker than my forearm, and snapped it clean in two. Just broke it like it was nothing, all while continuing to bare its teeth and growl even louder. That's when I knew this wasn't a warning. This thing was getting ready to come after me. My survival instinct finally kicked in. I began backing away slowly, remembering all those nature documentaries that say not to run from predators. But the creature kept advancing, stepping into the shallow water with heavy, splashing footsteps. The creek wasn't deep there, maybe 2 feet at most, and it crossed with just a few strides, still clutching the broken branch. When it reached my side of the creek, something in me snapped. I turned and ran, full sprint, blind panic. I didn't think about my backpack that I'd left by the log. I didn't think about taking the correct path. I just ran. Somehow I found the trail. Pure adrenaline pushed me forward as branches whipped at my face and I stumbled over roots. What should have been a 5-minute run back to the main trail felt like an eternity. The whole time, I was waiting to feel massive hands grab me from behind or for that growl to sound right in my ear. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see it right behind me. Each time I looked, the trail was empty, but that didn't slow me down. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire, but I kept pushing. When I finally reached the main trail, I almost collided with an elderly couple walking their dog. They looked startled as I burst out of the side trail, sweating and wild-eyed. The woman asked if I was okay, but I barely managed to gasp out, "I'm fine," before continuing my sprint toward the parking lot. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was getting low. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my truck and a couple other vehicles scattered around. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my keys out of my pocket. I fumbled with the door, finally got it open, and practically threw myself into the driver's seat. I started the engine with trembling hands and locked all the doors, scanning the tree line for any sign of the creature. Nothing, but that didn't calm me down. I threw the truck in reverse, spun around, and drove out of that parking lot faster than was probably safe. The entire drive out of the park, I kept checking my rear-view mirror. Part of me kept expecting to see that massive form emerge from between the trees or standing in the middle of the road. Even when I hit the main highway, I couldn't relax. I must have been 15 miles away before my heart rate started to normalize. I stopped at a gas station about an hour into my drive home. As I was pumping gas, it hit me. I'd left my backpack behind, my water bottle, my snacks, my camera with all the photos I'd taken that day, but there was no way in hell I was going back for them. Not then, not ever. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made me jolt awake. I kept seeing those eyes, that face, those massive arms breaking the branch with such ease. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't run when I did. The next morning, I debated reporting what I'd seen. To who, though? The park rangers? The police? What would I even say? I saw Bigfoot, and it was pissed. I'd sound insane. So I kept it to myself. In the days that followed, I researched everything I could about the Ho Rainforest. I found a few obscure forums where others claimed to have seen similar creatures in the Olympic Peninsula. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or mistaken bear sightings. But I know what I saw wasn't a bear. It's been 4 years now. I've never gone back to the Ho Rainforest. I still hike, but never alone, and never in dense, isolated areas. I carry bear spray now, though deep down I know it wouldn't have helped me that day. Sometimes I find myself staring at the forest line when I'm driving past wooded areas, half expecting to see that tall, dark figure watching me from between the trees. The rational part of my brain tells me I'm safe, that whatever I encountered that day is far away in the deep forest. But another part of me wonders if it remembers me, if it's still angry that I invaded its territory. I don't know what it was. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, some undiscovered species. The label doesn't really matter. What matters is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it made it very clear that I wasn't welcome there. That message came through loud and clear. I still have nightmares about that growl. Story 4. I've never really told this story outside my family, and it feels strange even typing it out now. But after reading others' experiences in this community, I figured maybe it was time to share my own. This happened back in the mid-70s, 1976 to be exact, and it still gives me chills thinking about it almost 50 years later. I lived just outside Spokane, Washington then, had a little house with a decent yard for my dog Murphy, a retriever mix I'd gotten as a puppy about 2 years earlier. He was a good-natured dog, medium-sized with a golden coat, always up for a walk or run, never the kind to bark unnecessarily, just a really steady animal, you know. Almost every weekend, when the weather permitted, I'd take Murphy out to this nature trail, about 20 minutes from my house. It wasn't anything fancy, just a dirt path through some pretty dense woods, lots of pines and firs, very Pacific Northwest. The trail followed along this shallow ravine for a good portion of it, maybe 30 feet deep, with tons of fallen trees and deadfall at the bottom. It was beautiful, peaceful, my way of decompressing from the week. That afternoon in late October was perfect hiking weather. Not too cold, but definitely fall. That crisp smell in the air, patches of dry brown pine needles covering parts of the trail. I remember I was wearing my favorite flannel shirt, jeans and hiking boots. Murphy was on his leash, though I'd sometimes let him off in certain sections where I knew we wouldn't run into anyone. I'd gotten there around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, but starting that slow descent behind the trees. The light had that golden quality it gets in the late afternoon, filtering through the branches. We'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes without seeing a single person, which wasn't unusual for a weekday. Most people were still at work, and this wasn't one of the more popular trails anyway. There were birds all around. I remember hearing crows somewhere off in the distance, and robins flitting between trees. Murphy was doing his usual thing, sniffing everything, occasionally looking up at me with that happy dog expression. Normal stuff. Then everything changed in an instant. Murphy just stopped. Middle of the trail, one paw slightly raised, his whole body suddenly rigid. At first, I thought he might have caught the scent of a deer or maybe a coyote. He was staring intently down into the ravine, completely focused, like hunting dogs do when they've spotted game. But he wasn't making a sound, no barking, no growling, nothing, just absolute stillness and attention. I tugged his leash gently. "What is it, boy?" No response, not even an ear twitch. Following his gaze, I looked down into the ravine where all those fallen trees created a maze of dead wood. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just shadows, tree trunks, the usual forest floor stuff. Then I noticed movement. Something was moving through the deadfall about 100 feet away. My first thought was deer, but immediately I knew that wasn't right. The movement was all wrong. Whatever this was, it was walking upright, stepping over logs and navigating through the fallen branches with deliberate movements. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing. For a split second, I wondered if it was another hiker who'd somehow made their way down into the ravine, but that didn't make sense either. This figure was too tall, too broad, and nobody hikes through a jumble of fallen trees when there's a perfectly good trail nearby. What really struck me was how it moved. I've never seen anything move like that before or since. It was almost elegant. That's not quite the right word. Efficient, incredibly efficient, like a speed skater or something. Smooth, controlled, purposeful. It was lifting its legs high to step over the bigger obstacles, but never stumbling, never hesitating. No human moves through debris like that. From my vantage point, I could make out its general shape, but not fine details. It was covered in what looked like hair or fur, not uniform in color, but various shades of gray with maybe some brown mixed in. The hair seemed coarse and uneven, longer in some places than others. The body shape was unmistakably humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. Too big, way too big. The shoulders especially caught my attention, incredibly wide and sloped, like you'd see on a serious bodybuilder, but more pronounced. And the arms were unusually long, hanging down around knee level. The head was large compared to a human's, sitting directly on those shoulders without much of a neck that I could see. I couldn't make out its face clearly from that distance and angle, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. There was something so profoundly unsettling about watching this thing move that I'm not sure I could have handled seeing its face up close. During this entire encounter, which probably lasted only 10 to 15 seconds, Murphy didn't move a muscle. He just stood there, rigid, watching. And that's when I realized something else that made my skin crawl. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. It was as if someone had just muted the entire woods. That background noise you don't even notice until it's gone. It was gone. Completely gone. like sound itself had been sucked out of the air. The creature never looked in our direction, never gave any indication it knew we were there. It just continued in a straight line through the tangle of deadfall until it reached the edge of the ravine, where it disappeared from view beyond a ridge. After it vanished, I stood there, frozen, same as Murphy. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For some reason, I was holding my breath, though I don't remember consciously deciding to do that. My palms were sweaty despite the cool air, and I had this overwhelming sense of being small and vulnerable in a way I'd never felt before. Murphy stayed locked in that same position for at least another minute or two. I had to crouch down beside him and gently stroke his head, talking to him in a low voice, before he would even look at me, much less move. When he finally did break his stance, he moved closer to my leg and stayed pressed against me, something he rarely did unless scared by thunder. I debated continuing our walk. We were only about halfway through the trail, but something in my gut told me to turn around. So I did, and Murphy seemed more than happy to head back toward the parking lot. The entire way back, the forest stayed eerily quiet. No birds returned to their singing. No squirrels rustling in the underbrush, nothing. And worse, I had this persistent sensation of being watched, like eyes were on us from every direction. I kept looking over my shoulder, checking the ravine edge, scanning between trees. I never saw the creature again, but that feeling of being observed never left until we were in my truck, with the doors locked. Later, at home, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. I've spent plenty of time outdoors. I know what bears look like when they stand up. This wasn't a bear. The proportions were wrong, the movement completely different. Bears don't move through obstacles like that, with that fluid, bipedal grace. And they certainly don't have those long arms or that distinctive shoulder structure. I estimated the thing stood at least 7 feet tall, probably more. Given how it navigated those fallen trees, it must have weighed considerably less than something that size should weigh. It moved too lightly, too easily over surfaces that would have cracked and shifted under such weight. And despite walking through dry deadfall that should have been crackling with every step, it made almost no sound that I could hear. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear something moving around outside my house. Murphy seemed more vigilant too, often getting up to look out windows for no apparent reason, his ears perked up listening. I told my wife what happened, and while she didn't dismiss me outright, I could tell she thought I'd seen a bear, or maybe even just another hiker. It wasn't until years later, when I described the experience to my cousin, who'd had his own strange encounter in the Oregon woods, that someone truly believed me. I've hiked many times since then, but I stick to open areas now, places with good visibility. I've never returned to that particular trail, and I never will. Murphy wouldn't have gone back either. He was always reluctant to go hiking after that day, even on completely different trails. I don't know what to call what I saw. Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Those names feel almost silly compared to the reality of what I experienced. Whatever it wasn't supposed to exist, at least not according to what we're taught about the natural world. But it was there, moving through those fallen trees, with a purpose and confidence that still haunts me. The thing that disturbs me most, looking back, wasn't just the creature itself, but how the entire forest reacted to its presence. That unnatural silence, the way Murphy froze. It was as if everything in those woods recognized something that didn't belong, something to be respected and feared. I'm 68 now, and I've told this story maybe a handful of times in my life. Each time I wonder if people think I'm crazy or just mistaken. But I know what I saw. On that quiet afternoon in 1976, I glimpsed something that shouldn't exist, something that permanently changed how I view the wilderness and the possibility of what might be out there, watching from the shadows. I still find myself scanning the tree line whenever I'm outdoors. And sometimes when I'm alone in quiet places, I still get that feeling, that distinctive sensation of being watched by something intelligent, something that doesn't want to be seen. And when that happens, I do what any sensible person would do. I leave quickly and quietly, without looking back. Story 5. I've been camping and hiking in the Pacific Northwest all my life. Born and raised near Seattle, I practically grew up in the Cascades. My dad took me on my first overnight trip when I was just 6 years old, and I've been hooked ever since. I've seen pretty much everything these mountains have to offer, or so I thought until that morning at Hemlock Lake. This happened in July of 2016. I had a few days off work and decided to head out to Hemlock Lake campgrounds in the Cascades. It's not the most popular spot, which is exactly why I like it. You can actually hear yourself think there, you know? I arrived Wednesday afternoon, set up my tent at a site that was decently separated from the few other campers, and spent the day fishing and hiking around the lake. Thursday was uneventful, more fishing, reading, just unwinding from work stress. I turned in early that night, around 10, because I wanted to catch the sunrise over the lake the next morning. I've always been a light sleeper, especially outdoors. So when something woke me around 4 in the morning on Friday, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was what woke me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The sound was distant but crystal clear, like someone had turned up the volume on a nature documentary playing a mile away. It was a long, sustained vocalization that echoed across the valley. My first sleepy thought was elk, but as I became more alert, I knew that wasn't right. I sat up in my sleeping bag and just listened. The campground was dead quiet. It was that perfect stillness you only get in the pre-dawn hours when even the birds haven't started their morning songs yet. No wind, no cars on the distant Forest Service road, nothing. Just this sound. After about 15 minutes of silence, I heard it again. Longer this time, deeper. I can't really describe it accurately, but it was like, imagine if a human could howl, but with the power of something much larger. It started low, rose in the middle, and then tapered off. It lasted maybe 8 or 10 seconds. The hair on my arm stood up. I'm not exaggerating. Something primordial in my brain recognized that sound as not normal. I unzipped my tent as quietly as possible and slipped my boots on without lacing them. I just wanted to get outside, where I could hear better, maybe determine the direction more precisely. The air was cool and damp, that perfect mountain morning feeling that usually brings me peace. Not this time. As I stood there in the dark, I realized two things. The sound was coming from the ridge across the lake, probably a mile away as the crow flies. And whatever was making it was big, really big. The volume alone suggested something with massive lungs and vocal cords. Then it came again. This third call was different. It had a pattern to it, almost like speech, but not quite. It rose and fell in a way that felt, I don't know how else to put this, emotional, like it was trying to communicate something specific, not just an animal marking territory or calling for a mate. This had nuance. I'm a rational person. I work in engineering. I don't believe in monsters or ghosts. But standing there in the dark, listening to that sound echo across the valley, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a little kid, afraid of the dark, pure instinctual fear. Something ancient in my DNA was telling me to get in my car and drive away. Instead, I grabbed my phone and tried to record the sound. Of course, my phone's microphone was garbage compared to the actual experience. The recording barely picked up anything, just some faint, distant noise that could have been anything. But I knew what I heard. The fourth call came about 20 minutes later, around 4:45. This one was the loudest and longest. It started as a low rumble that built into something between a roar and a howl. It must have lasted 15 seconds. What struck me was how it carried over the water. Sound travels better over water, sure, but this was remarkable. It was like whatever made the sound knew exactly how to project it for maximum distance. After that fourth call, the forest started to wake up. Birds began their morning songs as the sky lightened slightly. I kept waiting for another call, but it never came. By 5:30, the normal dawn chorus was in full swing, and whatever had made those sounds was silent. I spent the rest of that morning in a weird state of alertness. I kept my ears tuned for any unusual sounds, but there was nothing, just the normal forest noises. I hiked around a bit but stayed close to my campsite. I wasn't about to go investigating across the lake by myself. I'm not stupid. The strange thing was, when I casually mentioned some weird animal calls to a couple at the next campsite over, they hadn't heard anything. They'd slept through the night. That bothered me more than I care to admit. How could they not hear something so powerful? I stayed one more night, but nothing happened. I packed up Sunday morning and headed back to Seattle, filing the experience away as weird, but probably explainable. Maybe it was some kind of elk with an unusual call. Maybe it was people messing around, though I couldn't imagine how any human could produce those sounds. About 3 weeks later, I was scrolling through some outdoor forums, reading about hiking trails, when I stumbled across a thread about unusual wildlife encounters in the Cascades. Someone had posted an audio recording they'd made with a parabolic microphone, one of those dish-shaped ones that can pick up distant sounds. The post mentioned it was recorded near Mount Baker, about 100 miles north of Hemlock Lake. I hit play out of curiosity, and my blood turned cold. There it was. The exact same sound I'd heard that morning. The same tonal quality, the same rising and falling pattern, the same emotion. The recording was clearer than what I'd heard, but it was unmistakably the same type of vocalization. The poster had labeled it "Possible Sasquatch Calls." I've never been a believer in Bigfoot. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, you hear all the stories, but I always figured it was just folklore and misidentifications. But hearing that recording, it made me question things. I went down a rabbit hole of research that night, listening to every alleged Sasquatch recording I could find online. What I learned is that what I heard matches what researchers call samurai chatter, or long calls. They're supposedly used for long-distance communication between individuals. The power behind these calls is what distinguishes them from known wildlife. Experts say no North American animal can produce these specific vocalizations with that particular tonal quality. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I heard that morning. The rational part of me still wants to find a conventional explanation. But the part of me that was standing there in the dark, feeling that primal fear while those calls echoed across the valley, knows that whatever made those sounds was something outside my understanding of Pacific Northwest wildlife. What bothers me most is the intelligence I sensed in those calls. They weren't random. They had purpose. They had inflection. They were communication. And whatever was communicating was doing it with a voice that could carry for miles with perfect clarity. I've been back to Hemlock Lake twice since then. I even camped at the same spot. But I've never heard those sounds again. Sometimes I think maybe I imagined the whole thing or somehow distorted the memory over time. But then I go back and listen to that recording from Mount Baker, and I know exactly what I heard. I don't tell many people about this experience. Most would think I'm exaggerating or misidentified some common animal sound. Maybe I did. Maybe there's a perfectly normal explanation for what I heard that morning. But I can't shake the feeling that for about an hour, in the quiet pre-dawn darkness of the Cascade Mountains, I was listening to something that shouldn't exist, something that walks the line between myth and reality. The forest knows secrets that we don't. Sometimes in the darkness before dawn, it whispers them, or in my case, howls them across a silent lake. I don't have proof beyond my own experience, and I don't expect anyone to believe me. But I know what I heard, and it wasn't anything that should have been in those woods. What haunts me most isn't just what I heard, but the question of whether it heard me too, whether it knew I was listening, whether from across that mile of forest and water it was calling directly to me or warning me away. I still camp and hike all over the Cascades, but now I listen differently to the sounds of the forest at night. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my tent and the darkness is at its deepest, I find myself holding my breath, waiting to hear that call again. Part of me hopes I never do, and part of me hopes that someday I'll understand what I heard that morning at Hemlock Lake. Story 6. I've lived in the woods near Mineral, Washington for almost 25 years now, but I've never experienced anything like what's been happening over the past several months. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired, or my eyes were playing tricks on me in the evening light. Now I'm not so sure. It started in June of 2022. I was driving home from the grocery store in Morton, taking that winding back road I always use. You know the one. It cuts through all those small farms and patches of forest, saving about 15 minutes compared to the main highway. I've driven it hundreds of times without incident. It was around 7 in the evening, still light out, but getting dusky. Summer evenings here stay bright pretty late. I was coming around that sharp bend just past the old Peterson property when I noticed something moving near the drainage ditch at the edge of their hayfield. At first I thought it might be a deer. We get tons of them around here, but as I got closer I realized whatever it was stood upright, really upright and tall. I slowed down a bit, curiosity getting the better of me. That's when I saw it clearly. It was walking parallel to the road, maybe 30 yards away from me. The thing was massive, I'd guess around 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It had this light-colored fur, kind of dirty blonde or light brown, all matted down like it hadn't been groomed in, well, ever. The way it moved was what really struck me. It wasn't a person in a costume. The movement was too fluid, too natural. Each stride covered so much ground. The strangest part was that it seemed completely unconcerned with my car. It just kept walking along, head facing forward, like I wasn't even there. I remember gripping my steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop, God no, but I didn't speed up either. Some part of me needed to keep looking, to confirm what I was seeing was real. After maybe 10 seconds, the road curved away, and I lost sight of it. The whole rest of the drive home, maybe another 10 minutes, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see it following me. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? Hey, I just saw Bigfoot on my way home from buying milk. I'd sound crazy, so I kept it to myself. For weeks afterward, I took the main road home instead. It added time to my commute, but I felt safer somehow. Eventually, though, I convinced myself I had just seen a particularly tall hiker with a backpack or something. The human mind likes explanations, right? So I went back to taking my usual route. That was a mistake. It was late October when I saw it again. The days were getting shorter and it was already dark by 6. My daughter Michelle was visiting from Seattle. She tries to come down every couple months to check on me since her father passed. We'd been out to dinner in Chehalis and were heading back to my place. This time, I was driving along that stretch near the Wilkins property, you know, where they have that Christmas tree farm. It's about 3 miles from the first sighting spot. The headlights caught something moving along the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just shadows from the trees, but then the shape solidified. It was walking along the roadside, moving with those same long, powerful strides I remembered. Its arms were longer than any human's should be, with one swinging out in this wide arc with each step. Its whole body swayed side to side in this, I don't know how to describe it, this primal way. "Mom, what the hell is that?" Michelle's voice was barely a whisper. She'd seen it too. That's when I knew I wasn't crazy. Before I could answer, the thing turned its head toward our car. The headlights illuminated its face and I heard Michelle gasp. Its face was mostly bare skin, a light pinkish color that stood out against the darker fur around it. It had this incredibly wide mouth and a flat, almost non-existent nose. But the eyes are what I remember most. They weren't animal eyes, but they weren't human either. There was an intelligence there that made my skin crawl. I sped up without thinking, blowing past it as fast as I could. Michelle was pressed back against her seat, frozen. "Have you seen that before?" she asked me, her voice shaking. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. "It looked right at us, Mom. It knew we were looking at it." We didn't talk much the rest of the drive home. When we got to my place, Michelle double-checked all the locks and insisted on closing all the blinds. She barely slept that night. The next morning, over coffee, she tried to convince me to move. "It's not safe out here alone, Mom," she said. "What if that thing decides to come closer to the house?" I brushed off her concerns. This was my home. I wasn't about to be scared away by whatever it was I'd seen. Besides, it had never shown any aggression. It was just walking, right? Michelle made me promise to get security cameras installed, which I did the following week. She also made me swear I'd call her immediately if I saw it again. I didn't have to wait long. It was January 3rd, 2023, just a few weeks ago. The holidays had come and gone. We'd had a cold snap, and there was still some snow on the ground, though the roads were mostly clear. I was coming home from my book club in Eatonville around 8:30. It gets dark so early in winter here, pitch black by 4:30, so I was driving carefully, especially on that back road. I was less than a mile from my driveway when my headlights caught something standing at the edge of the tree line. Not walking this time, just standing, watching. My blood went cold when I realized this spot was only about half a mile from my house, the closest I'd seen it yet. I slowed down instinctively, though everything inside me was screaming to speed up. As the headlights fully illuminated it, I could see it had changed somehow. Its fur was darker than before, more of a chocolate brown than the lighter color I'd seen initially. And it looked bigger, not taller but broader, more muscular across the chest and arms. It stood perfectly still, facing my car. Its eyes reflected red in my headlights, like a deer's would, but much larger and higher off the ground. I remember thinking, this thing knows where I live. It wasn't just a random sighting anymore. It felt deliberate, like it was making its presence known to me specifically. It was studying me, learning my patterns. The worst part was how calm it seemed. It didn't run or hide. It just stood there, watching my car approach, watching me watching it. I drove past it as quickly as I dared on the icy road. In my rearview mirror, I could see it turn its head to follow my car until I rounded the bend. When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes, engine running, headlights on, scanning the tree line at the edge of my property. I called Michelle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "It's getting closer," was all I could say when she answered. I've been watching the security camera footage obsessively since then. I haven't seen anything unusual, but I can't shake the feeling that it's out there, watching and waiting. I've started keeping track of where I've seen it on a map. There's a clear progression. Each sighting has been closer to my house than the last. The thing that bothers me most is the consistency. If it were just my imagination or different animals I was misidentifying, the details would vary more. But each time, it's had the same distinctive face, that wide mouth, those knowing eyes, the same impossible height and proportions, the same deliberate movement. Last night I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of something moving on my porch. Heavy footsteps, slow and measured. The motion sensor light came on, but by the time I worked up the courage to look out the window, whatever it was had gone. The security camera caught nothing, just the light coming on and then shutting off after a few minutes. This morning, though, I found footprints in the soft ground by my porch steps. They were huge, easily 17 inches long, and deeper at the front than the heel, like whatever made them carried its weight forward. They weren't bear tracks, I know what those looked like. These were clearly feet with 5 toes, just bigger than any humans could ever be. I've lived in these woods for decades. I know the local wildlife. I've seen bears, cougars, all kinds of creatures. This is different. Whatever I've been seeing isn't in any wildlife guide. I've started carrying bear spray with me everywhere, even just to get the mail. I don't drive that back road anymore, no matter how much time it saves. I've told a few close friends, but I can see the skepticism in their eyes. They think I'm just a lonely older woman letting her imagination run wild. Maybe part of me wishes that were true, but I know what I saw, all 3 times, and I know that whatever it is, it's been getting closer. The nights are the worst. Every creak of the house settling, every branch scratching against the window, they all sound like something trying to get in. Sometimes I swear I can feel eyes on me, watching from just beyond the reach of my porch light. What really keeps me up at night is trying to understand what it wants. Is it just curious, territorial? Or is there something more intentional about the way it's been appearing closer and closer to my home? I can't help but feel it's trying to communicate something to me, or maybe testing how I'll react. I haven't seen it again since that night in January. But somehow that's even more unsettling. I know it's still out there. I can feel it. And I can't shake the thought that next time it won't just be watching from a distance. Every evening now as the sun sets, I find myself staring out at the tree line, half expecting to see that tall silhouette standing there, watching me just as intently as I'm watching for it. And every night, I double-check the locks, close the blinds, and try to convince myself that tomorrow will be the day this all starts to make sense. But deep down, I know better. Whatever connection has formed between me and this creature, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. It knows where I live now, and I have the terrible feeling it's only a matter of time before our next encounter brings it right to my door. Story 7. I've debated sharing this for a long time. It's been over 13 years, but I still think about what happened that day in the woods. For those wondering, I'm not some conspiracy nut or someone who was out looking for Bigfoot. I was just a 27-year-old guy who loved hiking and had been doing solo trips in Washington state for years without anything unusual happening until September 9th, 2010. I'd taken a week off work to hike sections of the Pacific Crest Trail in the Alpine Lakes wilderness. It's some of the most beautiful country in Kittitas County, towering pines, crystal clear mountain lakes, and some pretty stunning views when you get up high enough. I'd been out there for 3 days already, camping and hiking different sections of the trail. Nothing weird had happened. The weather that week was perfect. Clear blue skies, temperatures in the mid-70s during the day, cooling down at night. That morning, I woke up early at my campsite near Deception Pass. I remember having instant coffee and oatmeal while watching the sunrise light up the mountains. My plan was to hike up to one of the higher ridgelines that day, take in the views, then head back down before dark. Pretty standard stuff. I packed light that day, just water, some trail mix, beef jerky, my camera, and a light jacket in case the weather turned. I left camp around 11 in the morning. The hike up was amazing as always. I passed a couple of groups heading down, a family with 2 teenagers and an older couple with matching hiking poles. But after that, I had the trail to myself. Something felt different about the woods that day, though. It took me a while to notice it, but once I did, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was just so quiet. Usually in those forests, you hear birds, squirrels, the rustling of small animals. But as I got higher up the trail, it was like someone had hit mute. I remember thinking it was strange, but figured maybe it was just the time of day or something. I reached the ridgeline around 3 in the afternoon. The view was incredible. You could see for miles across the forested valleys, and there were still patches of snow on some of the distant peaks, even though it was September. I sat on a boulder, ate some trail mix and took a few photos. I spent about an hour up there just taking it all in. Around 4, I decided to head back down. The sun was still up, but I knew I had maybe 3 hours of daylight left, and I wanted to get back to my campsite before dark. The descent started fine. The trail was well maintained in that section, winding through alpine meadows before dipping back into the denser forest below. As I got into the thicker trees, that weird silence became even more noticeable. No birds calling, no wind in the trees, nothing. Just the sound of my boots on the dirt and the occasional crunch of pine needles. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that when the forest goes quiet, it usually means there's a predator around, typically a bear or maybe a cougar. So I was alert, but not really scared. I'd encountered black bears before, and they usually want nothing to do with humans. I was about 1.5 miles from my campsite in a section where the trail curved around the mountain, with the slope rising steeply on my right and dropping off to my left. The sun was getting lower, creating long shadows through the trees. That's when it happened. I noticed movement ahead of me on the trail. At first I thought it was another hiker, but something about the way it moved immediately felt wrong. It was maybe 100 yards ahead, where the trail bent around a stand of pines. This figure crossed the trail from left to right, heading up the slope into the trees. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds, but I swear time slowed down. It was massive, way bigger than a person, covered in this reddish-brown hair, almost like a cinnamon color. What struck me most was how it moved. It was walking upright, completely bipedal, but with this fluid, purposeful stride. Not lumbering like you'd expect something that big to move, but smooth, almost graceful. I could only see it from about mid-thigh up because of the undergrowth and the angle of the slope. The head was partly obscured by branches, but what I could make out was a thick, muscular upper body with these incredibly broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. Not shaped like a bear at all. One arm was swinging naturally with its stride, a long arm that seemed proportionally too long for a human. And the weirdest part? It made absolutely no noise. Something that size should have been snapping branches, rustling leaves, making the forest floor creak. But there was nothing. Just this huge figure silently crossing the trail and disappearing into the trees on the uphill side. I froze in place. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't move for what felt like forever, but was probably just a minute or two. Part of me wanted to run back up the trail, but a deeper instinct told me to stay perfectly still. I remember my mouth going completely dry and my hands starting to shake. After a few minutes of nothing happening, I slowly took my backpack off and got my water bottle out. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I took a few sips, trying to process what I'd just seen. I kept staring at the spot where the figure had disappeared, half expecting it to come back, but the forest remained completely silent. No movement, no sounds. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. I was trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Could it have been a bear? No. The way it moved was all wrong. A person in a costume, out here, miles from the nearest road, on a section of trail where I hadn't seen another person for hours? That made no sense. Eventually, I knew I had to keep moving. It would be dark soon, and being stuck on the trail at night seemed worse than continuing. I put my backpack on and started walking again, much more slowly and quietly than before. Every few steps I'd stop and listen, scanning the woods around me. The silence was oppressive now, almost like a physical weight pressing down. I kept replaying those few seconds in my mind. The fluid movement, the proportions all wrong for a human, the absolute silence. I've seen black bears and even a few grizzlies in my years of hiking, and this wasn't anything like that. About 15 minutes later, I thought I heard something off in the trees to my right, up the slope in the general direction where the figure had gone. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like a subtle movement through the underbrush. I stopped again, my heart racing. Then I caught a whiff of something, a musky animal odor that I'd never smelled before. Not like bear or deer or anything I recognized. It was there for just a moment, then gone. I picked up my pace after that, not quite running, but moving faster than was probably safe on that trail. I kept looking over my shoulder and scanning the woods. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every shadow between the trees seemed to shift and move. Every rustle of pine needles made me jump. When I finally reached the more open section of trail near my campsite, the relief was incredible. Only then did I realize how tense my body had been. My shoulders were aching, and I had a headache from clenching my jaw. The sun was just touching the tops of the mountains, casting an orange glow over everything. I went straight to my tent and zipped myself inside, which is ridiculous when you think about it. Like a thin layer of nylon would protect me from whatever was out there. I lay there in my sleeping bag, fully clothed with my hiking boots still on, listening to the forest as darkness fell. That night was the longest of my life. Every sound outside the tent made my heart race. At one point, around 2 in the morning, I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps circling my campsite. Slow, measured steps that didn't sound human. I lay completely still, hardly breathing, as they made a complete circle around my tent and then faded away into the forest. I didn't sleep at all. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up camp faster than I ever have before and hiked out to my car at the trailhead. The whole hike out, I felt like something was following me, staying just out of sight in the trees. I kept stopping to look behind me but never saw anything. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long time, with the doors locked, trying to make sense of what had happened. I thought about reporting it, but to who? The park rangers? They'd think I was crazy or had seen a bear in bad lighting. I knew what I saw wasn't a bear. It's been 13 years, and I've never told many people about this. The few times I tried, I could see the skepticism in their eyes. I get it. I would have been skeptical too before it happened to me. But I know what I saw crossing that trail, the way it moved, the proportions of its body, the complete silence despite its size. I've been back to the Alpine Lakes wilderness many times since then. It's too beautiful to stay away from. But I've never hiked alone again, and I always make sure to be at a proper campground before dark. Sometimes, when I'm on the trails there, especially in the late afternoon when the shadows get long, I find myself scanning the trees, wondering if it's watching me. What haunts me most isn't the fear I felt that day, but the way it moved through the forest. It wasn't aggressive or threatening, it was just there, moving through its home with a kind of confidence and grace that made me feel like I was the intruder, not it. I don't know what to call what I saw that day, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. All I know is that something shares those woods that science hasn't explained, and it moves through them more silently and naturally than any human ever could. I think about those few seconds all the time, 5 or 6 seconds that completely changed how I see the wilderness, and make me wonder what else might be out there, just out of sight, watching us as we pass through. Story 8. I'm still pretty shaken up about what happened last October, but I need to get this out there. I've been quietly reading forums like this one for months, trying to find someone with a similar experience, and I think I'm finally ready to share. This happened to me and my brother-in-law Peter in 2015, and it's completely changed how I think about the woods in Washington state. It was October 12th, around 6:30 in the evening. The sun was going down, and we were heading east on Hartwood Road, just outside of Battleground. Peter and I had spent the day helping my sister move some furniture, and we were taking the back roads home because I wanted to show him a spot where I'd seen some deer the previous week. We were planning to go hunting that weekend. I was driving my old Ford F-150, and Peter was in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone looking at some hunting gear. Everything was totally normal. We were just talking about my sister's new place, and I remember Peter was complaining about his back hurting from carrying her couch up 3 flights of stairs. That's when we saw it. Out of nowhere, this weird flash of light shot across the sky to our left. It wasn't like a shooting star or anything I'd seen before. It was lower, maybe a few 100 feet up, and moved horizontally across our field of vision. It was bright white with a bluish tint, and it left this weird trail behind it. "The hell was that?" Peter said, suddenly alert and pointing at the sky. I slowed the truck down immediately. My first thought was that it might be a small plane going down or something. The light had disappeared behind the tree line, and we couldn't see anything else. "I don't know, but that didn't look right," I told him. "Should we stop and check it out?" Peter nodded, and I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. We both got out of the truck and just stood there for a minute listening. That's the first thing that struck me as odd. There was no crash sound, no explosion, nothing. Just silence. If it had been a plane or helicopter, we would have heard something. "Maybe we should check it out," I suggested. "If someone's in trouble out there." Peter agreed, and we started making our way through the brush toward where we thought the light had disappeared. There were some train tracks running parallel to the road, maybe 50 yards in from the shoulder. We figured they'd give us a clear path to follow, so we headed for them. Once we reached the tracks, we stood there for a moment, looking in both directions. The light was fading fast, and I realized we'd need a flashlight if we were going to search properly. "Hey, Pete, I'm going to head back to the truck and grab my spotlight and some gear," I told him. "You want to start walking down the tracks a bit? I'll catch up." He nodded and started walking east along the tracks. I turned back toward the truck. That's when I saw it for the first time. As I approached the road, I glimpsed what looked like someone standing near our truck. I'm not talking about seeing something out of the corner of my eye. I clearly saw what looked like a large man standing by the passenger side of my vehicle. My first thought was that someone else had stopped to help, but something felt off about the way this figure was standing. It was too still, too watchful. I looked down for literally 1 second to step over a fallen branch, and when I looked back up, there was nothing there. No person, no movement, nothing. Just my truck sitting where I'd left it. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I picked up my pace, feeling suddenly uneasy. When I got back to the truck, I checked all around it. Nobody was there, and there were no other vehicles nearby. I grabbed my high-powered spotlight from behind the seat, a length of rope. Force of habit, I always keep emergency supplies, and my cell phone. I hesitated, then grabbed my hunting knife too. Not that I thought I'd need it, but something didn't feel right. I headed back to the tracks and started walking in the direction Peter had gone. It was getting dark quickly now, and I switched on my spotlight, sweeping it ahead of me. "Peter!" I called out. Nothing. That's when I noticed the quiet. I mean, really noticed it. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows they're never truly silent. There's always something. Wind in the trees, birds, insects, distant traffic. But at that moment, there was absolutely nothing. No sound at all except my boots crunching on the gravel between the railroad ties. I've been in these woods my entire life, and I'd never experienced anything like that silence. It felt wrong. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. I think that's when my subconscious started sending warning signals, but I was focused on finding Peter. I placed a decent-sized rock on one of the rails as a marker to help me find my way back, then continued walking. I kept calling for Peter and sweeping my light through the trees on either side of the tracks. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was no sign of him. After walking for maybe 15 minutes, I started getting seriously concerned. Peter should have answered by now. I tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I called my wife to let her know what was happening, just in case we needed help. Hey, listen, I told her. Peter and I saw something weird on Hartwood Road. Maybe a plane going down or something. We stopped to check it out, but we got separated. If you don't hear from me in an hour, call. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel behind me. I spun around, sweeping the spotlight in that direction, and there was Peter, walking slowly toward me. I felt a huge wave of relief, but it quickly turned to concern when I got a good look at him. He looked terrible. His clothes were torn, he had scrapes on his hands and face, and he was walking like he was hurt. His expression is what really got me, though. I'd never seen Peter look like that. He looked haunted. Jesus, Pete, what happened? I asked, rushing toward him. He didn't answer my question. He just said, "Take me back to the truck, Jack, right now." I didn't argue. I switched off my phone mid-call, and we started walking back toward my marker rock. Peter was quiet for a few minutes, just breathing heavily and walking with this slight limp. When we got to the rock, he suddenly sat down on the gravel. "I need a minute," he said, his voice shaking a little. "What happened, Pete?" "Did you fall?" I asked, crouching next to him and shining the light to check his injuries. He had scrapes on his knees showing through torn jeans, and when he lifted his shirt, I could see more abrasions on his ribs. He took a deep breath and then looked me right in the eye. "I saw something on the tracks, Jack," he said quietly. "Something big." I waited for him to continue, not wanting to interrupt. I was walking along, looking for where that light might have landed, when I felt, I don't know how to describe it, like when you know someone's watching you. I turned and there it was, standing right beside the tracks, maybe 30 feet ahead of me. "What was it?" I asked. "A bear?" Peter shook his head firmly. "It wasn't a bear. It was standing upright like a man. But it wasn't a man, Jack. It was too big, way too big." I felt a chill run through me, remembering the figure I thought I'd seen by the truck. "It was covered in hair," Peter continued, his voice getting quieter, like he was afraid of being overheard. "Dark hair all over its body, and we just stared at each other. I couldn't move. I literally couldn't make my legs work. It felt like forever that we just stood there looking at each other." "Did it come toward you?" I asked. "No," Peter said. "It just stood there watching me. But then I tried to back away, and I kept tripping over the rails and ties. That's how I got these." He gestured to his scrapes. "I fell 3 times trying to get away from it." I was looking over my shoulder the whole time, expecting it to chase me, but it didn't. It just stood there. We sat in silence for a moment. I believed him. I've known Peter for 15 years. He's married to my sister, and he's not the type to make things up. He's been hunting since he was a kid. He knows what animals look like, even in poor light. "Did you see anything when you went back to the truck?" Peter finally asked. I hesitated, then told him about the figure I'd glimpsed. "I thought it was a person at first, but it disappeared so quickly." Peter nodded slowly. "It could move fast, really fast." We made our way back to the truck in silence. The whole time I kept sweeping my spotlight back and forth, half expecting to see something watching us from the trees. The unnatural quiet continued the entire way back, and I didn't relax until we were both in the truck with the doors locked and the engine running. The drive home was mostly silent. Peter called his wife to let her know we were on our way. He didn't mention what he'd seen, just said we'd looked around but hadn't found anything. I could tell he was processing what had happened. When we got to his house, I went in with him to help explain things to his wife, Emily. Once inside, he sat down at the kitchen table and finally told the full story. Emily's face went from concerned to shocked as Peter described the creature. "It was massive, Em," he said, his voice still shaky. "I'm 6'1", but this thing was way taller than me, maybe 7 feet at least. And it was built like a linebacker, but bigger, broader. Its eyes caught the light when I shined my phone at it. They reflected like an animal's." Emily didn't know what to say. None of us did. Peter isn't the type to exaggerate or make things up. He doesn't drink or use drugs. He's just a straightforward, practical guy who loves hunting and fishing. And here he was, visibly shaken by what he'd seen. I stayed for a while, making sure he was okay. His injuries weren't serious, just scrapes and bruises from his falls. But he was clearly disturbed by the experience. Before I left, he pulled me aside. "Jack, I've been in those woods my whole life," he said quietly. "My dad took me hunting there when I was a kid. I know every animal that lives in this region. What I saw tonight, I don't have an explanation for it." I nodded. "I believe you, Pete." And I meant it. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I called my son, Ryan, and asked if he wanted to go check out the area in daylight. He's always been interested in weird stuff, and I knew he'd be up for it. We went back to the exact spot where I'd parked the truck the night before. In daylight, it all looked so normal, just a stretch of road with woods on either side. We found the path Peter and I had made through the brush to the tracks, and we followed it. Once at the tracks, we walked for nearly 2 miles in both directions. We were looking for anything. Debris from a crashed aircraft, scorched trees from a fire, unusual footprints, broken branches. Anything that might explain what we'd experienced. We found absolutely nothing. No crash site, no strange lights, no footprints large enough to match Peter's description. As we were walking back to the car, Ryan asked me, "Do you think Uncle Peter saw a Sasquatch?" I didn't answer right away. I've never been one to believe in that sort of thing. I've always thought Bigfoot was just a myth, a story people tell to explain strange noises in the woods or misidentified bears. But then I remembered the figure I'd seen by the truck, how it had disappeared in the blink of an eye, the unnatural silence in the woods, Peter's genuine fear. "I don't know, Ryan," I finally said. "All I know is that something was out there. Something that scared the hell out of one of the most experienced hunters I know. It's been months since that night, and Peter still won't go back to those woods. He cancelled our planned hunting trip and hasn't been hunting at all since then. When family members ask why, he changes the subject. I've been back a few times during daylight hours, always with someone else, looking for any sign of what we experienced. I've never found anything concrete, but I've noticed something. Those woods still get unnaturally quiet sometimes, like everything living there knows something we don't. I've spent hours researching online, reading accounts from people who claim to have seen similar creatures. Some of the descriptions match what Peter saw. The height, the build, the hair covering the body, the way it just stood and watched. I've even contacted a few local researchers who investigate Sasquatch sightings, though I haven't heard back from them yet. I don't know what Peter and I encountered that night in October. I don't know if it was connected to the strange light we saw, or if that was just a coincidence that led us into its territory. What I do know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it changed how I think about the forests I've known all my life. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking about that moment when I glimpsed the figure by my truck. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked down for that split second. Would it still have vanished, or would I have had my own face-to-face encounter like Peter did? The scariest part is not knowing if it was just passing through, or if it's still out there in those woods, watching and waiting for someone else to stumble into its path. Every time I drive down Hartwood Road now, especially as the sun is setting, I find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if something is scanning back. Story 9. I've always considered myself pretty level-headed when it comes to the outdoors. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, camping and fishing were just part of life. I worked at the Kalama River fish hatchery for almost 7 years, so the wilderness around the upper Kalama was practically my office. That's why what happened to me in May of 2004 has messed me up so badly. Because I can't explain it, and I can't convince myself it was just my imagination. I'd been working overtime for weeks during the spring release, so when things finally slowed down, I decided to take 3 days off for some solo camping and fishing. My boss didn't mind. He knew I needed the break. I packed my new REI tent, a birthday splurge, my dad's old Coleman sleeping bag I'd fixed up, my favorite sage fly rod, and enough supplies for a comfortable few days. I drove up to the upper Kalama, past the normal fishing spots to a place we called Pine Bend. It's about 20 miles upstream, where the river makes this gorgeous S-curve through a valley. There's no designated campsite, and honestly, not many people go there because the road is rough as hell and you've got to hike in the last mile. I arrived around 1 in the afternoon on Tuesday. The weather was perfect, about 65 degrees, clear sky, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. I found a flat spot about 50 yards from the river, under a stand of Douglas firs. The site was natural and untouched, with soft ground covered in pine needles. You could hear the river bubbling over rocks nearby, but you couldn't see it through the brush, exactly the kind of peaceful isolation I was looking for. I spent the afternoon setting up camp, collecting firewood and arranging my gear. I made what I'd call a proper camp. Tent positioned away from any widowmakers, dead branches that could fall. Gear organized, food supplies hung from a tree about 100 feet away to avoid attracting bears. I'd been doing this my whole life. I know the protocols. By late afternoon, I'd set up completely and decided to try my luck at the river. I caught 2 decent rainbow trout, cleaned them streamside, and brought them back to camp for dinner. I cooked them over the fire with some lemon and herbs I'd brought, had a couple beers, and felt myself finally unwinding. For the first time in months, my shoulders weren't knotted with tension. The forest was doing its thing. Therapeutic silence broken only by natural sounds. The sun started setting around 8:30, and I built up the fire to last a while. I'd gathered plenty of wood, stacking it nearby so I could feed the flames throughout the evening. I remember sitting in my camp chair, looking up at the stars starting to appear, thinking how perfect everything was. I even remember having this specific thought: this is why I live here. This is worth all the rain. That feeling didn't last long. It was around 10 o'clock, full dark now, when I first noticed something was off. At first, it was just a feeling, that prickly sensation on the back of your neck when you feel watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just typical woods at night jitters that even experienced campers get. But then I heard it, a branch snapping about 50 yards behind my tent. Now, animals break branches all the time in the forest. Deer, elk, even raccoons can make surprising amounts of noise, but this wasn't light. It was a crack that echoed, the sound of something substantial breaking under weight. I stood up, shined my flashlight in that direction, but couldn't see anything beyond the first few trees. The light just disappeared into the darkness. "Hello," I called out, thinking maybe another hiker had wandered in, though that would be bizarre given the location. No response. I sat back down, but I was alert now. I added more wood to the fire, building it up higher than I normally would. Another 15 minutes passed in silence, and I started to relax again, figuring it was probably just an elk passing through. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling grunt from the tree line opposite, where I'd heard the branch snap. It wasn't a bear sound, it wasn't an elk bugle. It was deeper, more resonant, almost like a human sound, but not quite. The hair on my arm stood up. "Who's there?" I called again, this time grabbing my hatchet from beside the fire. Again, no answer. Over the next hour, the sounds continued. Not constantly, but periodically. Heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush, circling my campsite but never coming into the light. Branches breaking, not just small ones but sounds of wood splintering that would require significant force. And that breathing, deep, rhythmic breathing that sometimes sounded like it was coming from something large, something with big lungs. I kept building the fire higher and higher, creating a larger circle of light. I was burning through my wood supply way too quickly, but I felt certain that whatever was out there was staying just beyond the firelight. By midnight, I was down to sitting on my camp chair with the hatchet in one hand and my large hunting knife in the other. I'd abandoned any pretense of relaxation. The worst moment came around 2 in the morning. The footsteps had been quiet for maybe 20 minutes, and I was straining to hear anything. Then suddenly, from directly behind me, maybe 15 feet beyond the firelight, came this sound I still can't fully describe. It was like a forceful exhale combined with a low vocalization, not quite a growl, not quite speech. It was deliberate, like whatever made it wanted me to hear it. I spun around, heart hammering, and shouted, "I have a weapon!" Which, looking back, was probably useless, but I was running on pure adrenaline. What followed was the most terrifying response. 3 heavy, deliberate footsteps coming toward me, stopping just at what I assumed was the edge of the firelight. Then silence. I swear I could feel it watching me. I could sense its height, taller than me, taller than makes sense for any normal forest creature. I stood there, frozen, staring into absolute darkness, seeing nothing but feeling everything. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated slowly. But it didn't leave. For the rest of that night, it circled my camp, moving from one position to another, always staying just out of sight. Sometimes I'd hear it breaking branches, not by walking on them, but breaking them with what sounded like hands. Some of these cracks came from heights that would be at least 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I kept feeding the fire, using every piece of wood I'd gathered, plus breaking apart some camp furniture I'd made earlier. By 4 in the morning, I was running dangerously low, and the thought of being in darkness with that thing nearby made my heart feel like it would explode. Around 5, as the sky started to lighten just barely, the sounds finally stopped. Not gradually, they just ceased. 1 minute there were footsteps and breaking branches, the next, complete forest silence. Even the normal dawn chorus of birds seemed delayed. I didn't wait to find out if it was really gone. As soon as there was enough light to see the path, I grabbed my car keys, wallet, and phone, and I ran. I left everything else. My new tent, sleeping bag, fishing gear, food, everything. I just ran that mile back to my truck, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling exposed and vulnerable in the growing daylight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove back to town doing 40 down that rough forest road, bottoming out my suspension multiple times. I didn't care. I just needed distance. When I got back to town, I went straight to my buddy Mark's place. He took one look at me and knew something was seriously wrong. I was filthy, wild-eyed, and probably looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I had. I told him what happened, and to his credit, he didn't laugh or dismiss it. He asked questions, logical ones, trying to help me find a rational explanation. Was it a bear? No. Bears don't circle a camp for hours without making a move. Was it people messing with me? In that remote location? Not likely. Besides, whoever it was would have had to stand in freezing darkness for 7 hours just to scare me. The next day, Mark and his brother Jeff offered to go retrieve my gear. I gave them directions to the site but refused to go with them. They thought I was embarrassed about running off, but it wasn't that. I physically couldn't make myself go back there. They returned that evening with all my stuff loaded in Jeff's pickup, but the look on their faces told me they hadn't just found my abandoned campsite. We sat on Mark's porch, and they described what they'd seen. The camp was untouched, tent still standing, gear still inside, everything exactly as I'd left it. No animal had gotten into the food or disturbed anything. But surrounding the camp, in a perfect circle just beyond where my fire's light would have reached, they found footprints, not bear prints, not human prints exactly either. They were barefoot impressions, humanoid in shape but massive. Jeff measured one with his tape measure at just over 17 inches long and extremely wide. The prints sank deep into the soft earth, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. More disturbing were the branches. Throughout the area surrounding my camp, branches were snapped and broken at heights of 7 to 9 feet off the ground. Some of these branches were thick. Mark showed me a piece he'd brought back that was almost 2 inches in diameter. It wasn't rotted or weakened. Something had simply snapped it with force. I've never gone back to that spot. I transferred to a different hatchery down near Vancouver a month later. I still fish. Still camp occasionally, but never alone and never in remote places. I keep trying to convince myself it was a bear or some elaborate prank, or even just my mind playing tricks after too many stressful weeks at work. But then I remember the breathing, the deliberate movements, the feeling of being watched by something intelligent. I remember how it tested the boundaries of my firelight, but never crossed into it. And I know whatever was stalking me that night wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. The locals around Kalama have their theories. They call it Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and the old-timers have stories going back generations. Before this happened, I'd laugh along politely when they talked about it. Now, I just get quiet. I don't know what was in those woods with me that night, but I know it was real. It was calculating, and it could have gotten to me if it wanted to. Sometimes I wonder why it didn't. Was it just curious? Was it territorial? Or was it simply enjoying my fear, playing a game I didn't understand? All I know is that I felt something ancient out there, something that knows those forests far better than we ever will. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear those deliberate footsteps circling just beyond the light. Story 10. I never wanted to write this down. For over 20 years, I've kept most of this to myself, only telling pieces to close friends who wouldn't think I'm crazy. But after seeing similar stories pop up online, I figured maybe it's time to share what happened to me back in 2001. I used to own a small bait and tackle shop along the Kalama River in Cowlitz County, Washington. Beautiful area, peaceful, or at least I thought it was. I'm not some attention seeker or conspiracy nut. Before all this happened, I'd laugh at people who claimed to see Bigfoot or whatever, but after that summer, I stopped laughing. Some things you can't explain away, and some things stay with you forever. It started in early July 2001. I was opening my shop around 5 a.m. when this couple pulled in, looking shaken. They were regulars, nice folks who'd come up from Portland to fish the summer steelhead run. The woman was crying, and the guy looked like he'd seen a ghost. They told me they'd arrived around 3:30 that morning at Beginner's Hole, this popular fishing spot about 2 miles upstream from my shop. It's this nice, easy access point where the river widens out, got its name because it's where people often catch their first steelhead. Anyway, they'd gotten there early to get a good spot, but decided to rest in their car for a bit before starting. They had their seats reclined, radio playing low, just dozing. The guy said something hit his driver's side window with such force that the whole car shook. He thought the window would shatter. His first reaction was that someone was trying to break in, so he sat up and flipped on his headlights. Nothing. Empty parking lot. No other cars. No people. Nothing that could have hit the window. No fallen branches. Nothing. The woman was terrified, convinced someone was hiding out there. They waited a few minutes, too scared to get out, then drove straight to my shop and parked under the lights until I arrived. I calmed them down, made some coffee, and figured it was probably just some local kids messing around, but the look on their faces stayed with me, pure fear. About a week later, I was locking up my shop around 9:30 p.m. when someone started pounding on the door. This guy, I knew him, local fisherman named Dave, was standing there white as a sheet, breathing hard like he'd been running. I let him in, and he kept looking over his shoulder while telling me what happened. He'd been walking along the road past Beginner's Hole, heading home after an evening on the river, when he saw something standing on the riverbank. Said it was about 75 feet away, standing upright, just watching him. It was almost dark, but he could make out the shape. Tall, way taller than a person, and broad. He kept walking, trying not to look at it, but when he glanced back, it was still there, watching him. Dave literally ran the last quarter mile to my shop. "Wade," he said to me, "I don't know what the hell that was, but it wasn't human. Don't go out there tonight." He refused to walk back home and called his wife to pick him up from my shop. Now, Dave isn't the type to make stuff up. He's a no-nonsense guy, Vietnam vet, been fishing that river for 30 years. When someone like that is scared, you pay attention. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear standing on its hind legs. We occasionally get black bears in the area, but deep down, I knew bears don't just stand there watching people walk by. They run off. A few days later, my beer distributor Frank stopped by the shop. Frank's this big guy, former college football player, not scared of much. We'd become fishing buddies over the years, and that night we decided to try our luck with the summer run steelhead. It was around 10:80 p.m. when we headed up to, you guessed it, Beginner's Hole. I hadn't told Frank about the weird incidents. Didn't want to sound crazy, I guess. We parked in the small lot by the river, grabbed our gear, and walked down to the water. It was a clear night, nearly full moon, so we could see pretty well once our eyes adjusted. The fishing was slow, but we noticed something odd. Fish were jumping like crazy in the deeper part of the hole, which isn't normal behavior for steelhead at night. Frank decided to move downstream a bit, maybe 20 yards behind some bushes where there's a nice riffle. I stayed at the main hole. Couldn't have been more than 5 minutes later when I heard this enormous splash, followed immediately by Frank crashing through the bushes, running back toward me. "Holy shit, Wade! Holy shit!" He was soaked from the knees down and breathing hard. "What happened?" I asked, thinking maybe he'd fallen in. "There's something in the fucking water, man, something big." His voice was shaking. I was just standing there casting when this thing came up out of the water not 10 feet from me, like a massive ape or something. It went back under, then jumped out again. The splash soaked me. Frank was legitimately terrified. This guy who wasn't afraid of anything was actually trembling. We grabbed our stuff and got the hell out of there. On the drive back, Frank kept saying he'd never seen anything like it. Dark, hairy, huge. Said it moved like nothing he'd ever seen, powerful and fast. We avoided Beginner's Hole for almost a week after that. But fishing is fishing. And eventually, we convinced ourselves that maybe Frank had seen a bear swimming across the river. I mean, what else could it be, right? So we went back. This time, I suggested we stay close together. Frank was rigging up his gear in the headlights of the truck while I walked ahead to the bank to make a few casts. The river was running clear, about normal summer level. Everything seemed peaceful. Too peaceful, actually. No nighthawks, no frogs croaking. I'd made maybe 3 casts when I heard a splash across the river. At first, I thought it was a jumping fish, but then I realized it was too loud. I pointed my headlamp across and saw ripples in the water like something had been thrown in. Then another splash, bigger this time. A rock, had to be the size of a basketball, hit the water about 30 feet across from me. Before I could process what was happening, this sound started. It began as this deep guttural moan that raised the hair on my neck, then built into this high-pitched scream that echoed through the canyon. I've heard elk bugle, cougars scream, bears roar. This wasn't anything like those. It was primal, ancient, terrifying. The scream came again, and I could hear whatever was making it moving uphill on the other side, crashing through the underbrush. The speed was impossible. It was covering ground faster than any human could, especially on that steep slope. The crashing and screaming continued all the way up to the ridgetop, maybe 300 vertical feet up from the river, in seconds. Then silence. Frank was beside me by then. We didn't say a word, just grabbed our stuff and ran back to the truck. The whole drive home, we barely spoke. What could we say? We'd both heard it. We both knew it wasn't normal. For weeks after that, I avoided Beginner's Hole completely. Business was good that summer, and I was guiding day trips further downstream. But eventually, I got a booking I couldn't refuse. A local property owner wanted a night float trip and was bringing a friend visiting from Iowa. Good money, and they specifically wanted to fish the upper section that included Beginner's Hole. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We launched around 10:30 p.m., a drift boat with the three of us. The local guy, Mark, knew the river well. His friend Bill from Iowa had never caught a steelhead and was excited for the opportunity. We started at Beginner's Hole, and I was secretly hoping we wouldn't get any action so we could move downstream quickly. After about 20 minutes with no bites, I suggested we drift down to the next hole. Mark laughed and said, "What's wrong, Wade? Scared of the dark?" I tried to play it cool, but he kept pushing. "I heard you've been telling stories about this spot. Something about monsters in the water. Word gets around in small towns." I reluctantly admitted that I'd had some strange experiences there. Bill got curious and asked for details, so I gave them the condensed version of what had happened. Mark thought it was hilarious. "Probably just a couple of poachers messing with you, Wade. Or maybe Sasquatch wanted your fishing spot." We were about to pull anchor when I felt a tug on my line. Not a fish strike. More like my line had snagged on something heavy that was moving. "Got something?" I said, reeling slowly to maintain tension. Bill got excited, thinking it might be a steelhead. "Let me take it," he said. "Could be my first." I handed him the rod, and he started working whatever was on the line. It wasn't fighting like a fish, more pulling steadily, moving upstream slightly. That's when we saw it. About 30 feet from the boat, something rose out of the water. At first, just a shape breaking the surface, but then it kept coming up and up. The small gear light we had clipped to the gunnel partially illuminated it, a massive, broad body with long arms that swung slowly, as if it was trying to untangle itself from the line. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. We just stared as this thing, this impossible thing, stood there in waist-deep water. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. I couldn't make out facial features clearly, just the silhouette, broad shoulders, no neck to speak of, and those arms hanging almost to the water's surface. I snapped out of it first, quietly pulling the anchor so we could drift backward. Bill maintained tension on the line, probably too shocked to do anything else. The creature stayed partially above water for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of minutes before making a sudden movement. The line went slack. It had broken free. We watched as it submerged again, a visible wake trailing behind it as it moved downstream. It never resurfaced, at least not where we could see it. The silence in the boat was deafening. Even Mark, who'd been joking minutes before, sat motionless, his face drained of color. Finally, Bill whispered, "What the hell was that?" Nobody answered because nobody knew. We drifted all the way back to the takeout point without casting another line. Nobody wanted to put their hands in the water to wash them off. Nobody wanted to step out of the boat into the shallows when we landed. That was my last trip to Beginner's Hole. Within a month, I'd stopped guiding night trips altogether. By the end of the year, I'd sold my business and moved to Eastern Washington. I've thought about those encounters constantly over the years. Whatever was in that river wasn't a bear, wasn't an elk, wasn't anything I could rationalize away. The local wildlife department had been releasing summer-run steelhead from a hatchery near there for years, creating this artificial concentration of fish. Maybe that's what attracted it, easy food in a predictable location. The strangest part is how many people had similar experiences in that same area that summer, always between about 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., always at or near Beginner's Hole, always involving something large, something that shouldn't exist. I've never gone public with this before because, well, who would believe it? But I know what I saw. I know what Frank saw. I know what those other witnesses saw. Something was hunting in that river. Something that watched us, threw rocks at us, screamed at us, and finally showed itself to us. I don't fish at night anymore. Haven't since 2001. Some things you just can't unsee, and some places are better left alone after dark. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, waiting in the deep water of Beginner's Hole for someone like me to come back. Story 11. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or anything like that. After 23 years as a park ranger in Washington State, I'd seen just about everything the wilderness could throw at me. Bears, cougars, even the occasional wolf. I knew how to handle myself. But what happened that day in November of 1978 shook me to my core. Even now, I find it difficult to talk about. Most people would think I'm crazy. And for years, I kept this story between myself, my hunting partner Daniel, and a few trusted friends. But I think it's important to share what we saw. I know we aren't the only ones. Daniel Wilson and I had been planning our elk hunt for months. We both had the weekend off from ranger duties, and the Grace River area had been promising that season. Reports from other hunters suggested a healthy herd with at least one impressive 5-point bull. We decided to use our muzzle loaders, partly for the challenge and partly because we both appreciated the traditional approach to hunting. There's something about hunting with a muzzle loader that connects you to the land in a different way. We set out before dawn that morning, driving my old Ford pickup as far as the logging road would take us. It was typical November weather in Washington. Cold, damp, with a thin fog hanging between the trees, the kind of morning where your breath hangs in the air and the forest feels ancient and watchful. We parked at the trailhead around 5:30 in the morning and began our hike into the backcountry. By mid-morning, we'd found fresh elk sign, droppings, torn bark where bulls had been rubbing their antlers, and clear tracks in the softer areas of the forest floor. The herd was moving through the old growth section, an area of towering Douglas firs and cedars that had been standing for centuries. Some of these giants were over 200 feet tall, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere with shafts of light filtering down through the canopy. We moved slowly and deliberately, communicating mostly with hand signals. Daniel and I had hunted together for over a decade, and we had our routine down to a science. The day passed with a few distant sightings, but the elk remained just out of range. We continued to track them, knowing that as evening approached, they'd likely move toward one of the meadows to graze. Around 4 in the afternoon, the light was already beginning to fade. That's the thing about November in the Pacific Northwest. Daylight is precious and fleeting. We were following a game trail that curved through a particularly dense section of the forest. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles. Must have been 6 or 7 inches deep in places, which made for silent walking, but also meant we couldn't see where we were placing our feet very well. I was in the lead, my muzzle loader in both hands, held at the ready. Daniel was about 15 yards behind me, covering our rear. The trail took a bend around an enormous cedar, one of those old monsters that would take 5 men linking arms to reach around its trunk. As I rounded that tree, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, not 6 feet in front of me, stood something I still struggle to describe all these years later. It was shaped like a man, but much, much larger. Standing upright on 2 legs, it towered above me. And I'm not a small guy at 6'1". This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair, not fur exactly, something coarser and more human-like. The color was a deep reddish-brown, almost black in the fading light. What struck me most was its build. This wasn't some lanky, thin creature. It had a massive barrel chest and shoulders that would make a linebacker look small. Its arms hung longer than a human should, with hands, yes, hands, not paws, that looked powerful enough to snap a small tree. But it was the face that haunts me to this day. Not quite human, not quite ape. A pronounced brow ridge shadowed its eyes, and its jaw jutted forward slightly. The nose was flat and wide, and those eyes, God, those eyes. They glowed a dull reddish color in the dim forest light, reflecting back at me like a deer's eyes in headlights, but with an intelligence that froze my blood. For what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, we stared at each other. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. My finger was on the trigger of my muzzle loader, but I couldn't have pulled it if my life depended on it. There was something in those eyes, not just animal wildness, but awareness, recognition even. Then, without a sound, and this still amazes me, it simply turned and was gone. No crashing through the underbrush, no breaking branches, nothing. It moved with a fluid grace that defied its massive size, vanishing into the forest faster than seemed possible. The thick bed of pine needles had completely muffled its retreat. I stood there, paralyzed, until Daniel caught up to me. He must have seen the look on my face because he immediately raised his own rifle, scanning the trees. "Tom, what is it?" he whispered, his voice tense. I couldn't find the words at first. My mouth was dry, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't sound like my own. I just saw something right here, right in front of me. Daniel kept his voice low. "Bear?" I shook my head. We both knew bear sign. We'd seen none all day. "No, it was standing upright, tall, 7 feet at least, covered in hair. It looked at me, Dan. It looked right at me and then just disappeared." I could see the skepticism on his face for just a moment before it gave way to concern. He knew me too well to think I'd make something like this up. In all our years of hunting together, I'd never once cried wolf or shown fear in the woods. "Sasquatch?" he asked, not mockingly but in genuine question. I'd never given much credence to Bigfoot stories. Working as rangers, we'd heard them all. Campers who heard strange noises, hikers who found unusual tracks, hunters who felt watched. We'd always chalked it up to imagination, to the way the woods can play tricks on your mind when you're alone in them. But there was no denying what I'd just seen. "I think so," I replied. "Jesus, Dan, it was right here." We stood back to back, scanning the forest in all directions. The light was fading fast now, the shadows between the trees growing longer and darker. Neither of us said it, but we both knew we had about 2 miles of hiking ahead of us to get back to the truck. 2 miles through the same section of forest where the creature had disappeared. "We need to move," Daniel finally said. "It'll be fully dark in less than an hour." We had flashlights, but neither of us relished the idea of being in these woods after dark. Not anymore. The problem was, the most direct route back to the truck meant following the same trail the creature had taken. We decided to proceed, but with extreme caution. Daniel took the lead this time, and I kept watch behind us. We moved slowly at first, every sense heightened to an almost painful degree. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made us freeze and scan our surroundings. The muzzle loaders suddenly felt woefully inadequate. A single shot, then a lengthy reload process. If that thing decided to charge us. About half a mile into our return journey, we both heard it. A low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt. It reverberated through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. We stopped, standing shoulder to shoulder now, weapons raised. "That's not an elk," Daniel whispered unnecessarily. The sound came again, this time from our right. Then, from much further away on our left, another similar call answered. My blood ran cold. There were at least 2 of them communicating with each other, and we were caught in between. We picked up our pace, trying to balance speed with stealth. The forest grew darker by the minute, shadows merging into a general gloom. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I would see red eyes staring back at me from between the trees. About a mile from the truck, Daniel suddenly raised his fist, the signal to stop. He pointed silently to our left. I squinted in the fading light, struggling to see what had caught his attention. There, about 50 yards away through the trees, something large moved parallel to our path. Just a dark shape, moving with that same unnatural silence, barely disturbing the vegetation. It was pacing us. We stood perfectly still, watching as it moved. It wasn't trying to approach us. It seemed content to maintain its distance. Was it escorting us out of its territory, herding us? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Daniel touched my arm and nodded forward. We needed to keep moving. Standing still only meant we'd be caught in the forest after dark. We continued at a faster pace now, no longer trying to be silent. Our boots crunched through the carpet of pine needles. Our breathing grew heavier, but we didn't stop. I kept glancing left, catching occasional glimpses of our escort. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always there. About half a mile from the truck, it happened. As we crossed a small clearing, I heard Daniel gasp. Following his gaze, I saw it clearly in the last light of day, the creature I'd encountered earlier, or one just like it, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, I wasn't the only witness. It stood completely still, watching us with those same glowing eyes. Now, in slightly better light, I could see more details. Its chest heaving slowly with breath, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold air. Its hands, so much like our own, but larger with thick fingers, hung at its sides. There was no aggression in its posture, just observation. Daniel raised his muzzle loader instinctively, but I put my hand on the barrel, gently pushing it down. "Don't," I whispered, "just keep walking." Something told me that any aggressive move on our part would be a terrible mistake. This creature, whatever it was, wasn't threatening us. Not yet, anyway. We continued across the clearing, neither of us taking our eyes off the figure at its edge. It made no move to follow us, but as we reached the tree line on the other side and I looked back, it had vanished again. The final quarter-mile to the truck was the longest of my life. We moved at just short of a run, no longer concerned with anything but getting out of those woods. The forest seemed different now, not the familiar wilderness I'd worked in for years, but something older and stranger, a place where the rules I understood didn't fully apply. When we finally broke through the trees and saw my pickup sitting where we'd left it, the relief was overwhelming. We practically threw our gear in the back and climbed inside, locking the doors automatically, though I knew that would make little difference if that creature decided to come after us. As I started the engine and turned on the headlights, I caught movement at the edge of the forest. There, just beyond the reach of the light, stood a dark figure. Just for a moment, and then it was gone. We drove back to town in near silence, both of us processing what we'd seen. It wasn't until we were sitting in my kitchen, a pair of whiskeys in front of us, that we really talked about it. "We should report it," Daniel said finally. I shook my head. "Report what exactly? And to who?" You know how these stories sound. As rangers, we'd taken reports of strange sightings before. Most were dismissed as misidentifications or imagination. I knew firsthand now that at least some of those reports must have been genuine. But what good would adding our names to the list do? We had no evidence, just our word. "We'll tell a few people we trust," I decided. "Beyond that, I'm not sure it matters." Over the years, we did exactly that. We told a handful of close friends, most of whom believed us simply because they knew we weren't the type to make up stories. A few other rangers privately shared similar experiences once they knew we'd had our own encounter. What strikes me most, looking back, is the silence of the creature. How something so large could move so quietly through the forest still amazes me. That carpet of pine needles explained it somewhat, but not entirely. These beings, whatever they are, have adapted perfectly to their environment. I've spent the decades since that day thinking about what I saw. I've read the scientific arguments against the existence of Bigfoot, the supposed impossibility of a large primate remaining undiscovered in North American forests. But science can't erase what I saw with my own eyes. I believe these creatures are real, and I believe they're far more common than most people realize. They're masters of their environment, perfectly adapted to avoid human contact. How many times have you felt watched in the forest? How many unexplained sounds have you dismissed? The woods are vast, and we humans stick to our trails and campgrounds, seeing only what we expect to see. I retired from the ranger service 12 years ago, but I still hunt those same forests. I've never had another encounter like that November day. But sometimes, when I'm deep in the old growth sections, I'll catch a scent I can't identify or hear a sound that makes me stop and listen. And I always check over my shoulder. Daniel passed away last year, heart attack. Nothing dramatic. Before he died, we talked about that day one last time. Neither of our stories had changed in all those years. We saw what we saw, and now I'm the only one left who was there. I'm sharing this now because I think it's important for people who spend time in the wilderness to know they might not be as alone out there as they think. I don't know what these creatures are or where they come from, but they're out there, watching from the shadows between the trees. Not aggressive, not malicious, just wary, intelligent beings sharing our forests. If you've had your own encounter, know that you're not crazy, and if you haven't, keep your eyes open and your mind receptive. The woods are full of mysteries we haven't begun to understand. Story 12. I've debated whether to share this for years. The military made it crystal clear I was never to talk about it, but it's been eating me up inside since 1978. I'm 58 now, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about those eyes. I was stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State back then, just a 22-year-old Army specialist who thought he knew how the world worked. God, I was naive. It happened during what was supposed to be routine night maneuvers in late October. The weather had turned cold early that year, and the forests around Fort Lewis were already getting that damp, earthy smell that means winter's coming. Our platoon had been out since early afternoon in a 5-ton transport truck, running drills in the more remote training areas of the base. There's a lot of dense forest there, miles of it that stretch right up into the mountains. Around 2100 hours, 9 p.m. for you civilians, our truck broke down about 12 miles from the main base. Something with the transmission, I think. The sergeant radioed for mechanics, but they couldn't come until morning. Most of the platoon pushed ahead on foot back to base, but someone had to stay with the truck and equipment. Guess who drew the short straw? Godoy, you're on guard duty until 0600, the sergeant told me. Mechanics will be here at first light. Standard protocol, no sleeping, hourly radio check-ins. I wasn't thrilled, but orders are orders. They left me with my M16, a field radio, some rations, and a heavy coat. I watched their flashlights disappear down the dirt road, and then it was just me and the sounds of the forest. The first couple hours were boring, but fine. I did my checks, walked perimeter, ate some tasteless rations, and tried to stay warm. It was cold as hell that night, probably in the high 30s, and my breath made these little clouds in the moonlight. The truck was parked at the edge of a clearing with dense forest maybe 300 meters away on 3 sides. Around midnight, I was leaning against the truck, stamping my feet to keep the blood flowing, when I felt something off. It's hard to explain, but you know when you suddenly realize you're being watched? Every hair on my body stood up at once. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a bear standing on its hind legs. But when I focused my beam in that direction, I realized it was much, much bigger than any bear. It was standing at the edge of the trees, partially hidden, but clearly visible in the moonlight. This thing was enormous. I'm 6 feet tall myself, but this creature had to be at least 8 feet, maybe even 9. It had a massive, broad chest and shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. The whole body was covered in thick, dark, grayish-brown hair. Not fur exactly, more like long hair that moved slightly in the breeze. But the face... Jesus, the face is what still haunts me. It was almost human-like, but with a pronounced brow ridge and a flatter nose. The mouth seemed wider than a human's, and I could see the outline of powerful jaws. And the eyes, they were glowing a dull reddish color, like embers. Not reflecting my flashlight, but actually giving off their own light. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My training kicked in, and I reached for the radio. But before I could call it in, the thing started moving. Not just moving, running, straight toward me. I've never seen anything that big move so fast. It covered ground in these massive strides, making almost no sound despite its size. That's when I truly panicked. Military protocol for an unknown threat approaching a guard position is pretty clear. 3 verbal warnings, then a warning shot, then shoot to stop if the threat continues. I followed it to the letter. "Halt!" I screamed, raising my rifle. "Halt! Identify yourself!" It kept coming, now about 150 meters away and closing fast. "Final warning! Halt or I will fire!" Nothing, just those eyes getting closer, locked on me. I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was deafening in the quiet forest, echoing off the mountains. For a split second, the creature paused, cocking its head like it was confused. Then it let out this sound, not quite a roar, not quite a scream, something between a gorilla's chest-beating cry and a man in agony. It made my blood run cold, and then it charged again, even faster. I wasn't taking any chances. I aimed center mass and squeezed the trigger. The M16 bucked against my shoulder as I fired 3 rounds in quick succession. At least 2 of them hit. I saw the impacts, saw dark patches appear on its chest. The thing staggered, grabbed at its torso, and let out a moan so human-like it made me sick to my stomach. It stood there, swaying for a moment, those red eyes now fixed on me with what I can only describe as hatred. Then it turned and loped back into the forest, leaving a trail of something dark dripping on the ground. I was shaking so bad I could barely hold the rifle. I ran to the truck cab, locked myself inside and grabbed the radio. But then I hesitated. Who would believe me? What would I even say? "Hey, I just shot Bigfoot?" They'd think I was hallucinating or had fallen asleep on duty. Either way, my career would be over. So I just sat there, rifle ready, watching the tree line until dawn broke. I didn't sleep a wink. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf had me jumping. I kept the rifle pointed out the window the whole time, certain that thing was out there, waiting, maybe dying, maybe planning revenge. At exactly 0600, I heard the mechanic's truck coming down the road. I've never been so happy to see other human beings in my life. There were 2 mechanics and a corporal from my platoon. I must have looked like shit because the first thing the corporal said was, "Godoy, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost blurted everything out right there, but something held me back. Instead, I just mumbled something about it being a long, cold night. But then one of the mechanics walked around to check the area and shouted, "Holy shit! You guys need to see this." We all went over to where he was standing at the edge of the clearing. There in the soft earth was a footprint. Not just any footprint. This thing was enormous, easily 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. It was clearly a foot shape with 5 toes, but no human makes prints that size. And there wasn't just one. There was a whole trail of them, leading from the tree line to about 50 meters from the truck, then back to the forest again. The corporal crouched down, staring at the prints. "What the hell made these?" Before I could answer, the second mechanic called out from further away, "There's blood over here, a lot of it." Sure enough, there were dark pools of something that looked like blood, but wrong somehow. It was reddish, but with an oily, almost iridescent quality to it. Nothing I'd ever seen before. That's when I finally told them what happened. The whole thing came pouring out. The creature, the shooting, everything. They looked skeptical at first, but the evidence was right there in front of them. The corporal got on his radio immediately. What happened next still feels surreal. Within an hour, the area was swarming with military personnel, not just regular army either. There were guys in white lab coats taking samples, measuring the footprints, photographing everything. They were collecting the blood into special containers with biohazard symbols on them. A team with dogs started tracking the blood trail into the forest. I was pulled aside by a major I'd never seen before, who told me I was being taken back to base immediately. He wouldn't answer any of my questions, just kept saying everything was under control and that I needed medical evaluation. When we got back to base, I wasn't taken to my barracks or even to the regular base hospital. Instead, I was brought to a secure medical facility I didn't even know existed on the north side of the base. They put me in an isolated examination room where a doctor in an Air Force colonel's uniform checked me over thoroughly. He took blood samples, hair samples, skin scrapings from under my fingernails, even had me stripped down to check for any unusual marks or residue on my body. The whole time he asked me detailed questions about the encounter. How tall was the creature exactly? Did it make any sounds before I saw it? Did I notice any unusual smells? Did it seem to communicate or show intelligence? Was I absolutely certain I had hit it with my rifle fire? After the examination, I was taken to what they called a debriefing, but felt more like an interrogation. The base commander himself was there, along with two men in civilian clothes who never gave their names. They recorded my statement, had me draw sketches of what I saw, made me go over the timeline again and again. Finally, the base commander looked me straight in the eye and said, "Specialist Godoy, by direct order of the United States Army, you are forbidden to discuss this incident with anyone, not your fellow soldiers, not your family, not even in private conversation with your spouse should you marry in the future. This is a matter of national security. Do you understand?" I nodded, still in shock from everything. "Violation of this order will result in immediate court-martial and imprisonment under the Espionage Act," he continued. "This incident never happened. The official record will show that you discharged your weapon at what you believed was a bear, but no animal was found. Is that clear?" What could I do? I agreed. They had me sign a stack of non-disclosure documents, then sent me back to my regular duties with orders to report to the base psychologist for standard post-incident counseling. 2 days later, I was in the mess hall when a lab technician I recognized from the medical facility sat down across from me. He looked nervous, glancing around to make sure nobody was watching us. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he whispered, "but I thought you deserved to know. I was one of the techs who analyzed your samples." "My samples?" I asked. "You mean the blood from the forest?" He nodded. "I've never seen anything like it. It contained human cellular structures, but also animal cells, unlike anything in our reference materials. And something else." He hesitated. "What?" "Chlorophyll," he said. "Plant matter, integrated at the cellular level. Like nothing that should exist in nature. Whatever you shot out there, it wasn't just an animal." Before I could ask anything else, he got up and left, avoiding me completely after that day. A week later, I heard he'd been transferred to another base. Over the next month, I noticed I was being watched. My mail was obviously being opened and resealed. My phone calls had strange clicking sounds. Twice, I spotted the same unmarked car following me when I went into town on weekend pass. 3 months after the incident, I was suddenly transferred to Fort Benning in Georgia, about as far from Washington State as they could send me. My commanding officer told me it was a career advancement opportunity, but I knew what it really was. They were getting me away from Fort Lewis and whatever secret they were hiding in those forests. I served out the rest of my enlistment without incident and got my honorable discharge in 1981. For years, I kept my mouth shut, tried to convince myself it was just a bear or some other explainable animal I'd seen that night. But I know what I saw. I know what I shot. I'm breaking my silence now, because people deserve to know. The military knows about these creatures. They've studied them, collected evidence, probably tracked and maybe even captured some of them. Why keep it secret? What are they afraid of? Sometimes I wonder if that thing survived, if it's still out there in those Washington forests, remembering the human who shot it, maybe even looking for me. And sometimes, on cold nights when the wind sounds a certain way, I swear I can hear that moan again, that horrible sound it made when my bullets hit it, half animal, half human, and something else entirely. I don't expect you to believe me, but I know what I saw. I know what I did, and I've carried it with me for over 40 years. If posting this gets me in trouble, so be it. Some truths need to be told, no matter the consequences. Story 13. I've kept this to myself for over 20 years now. Only a handful of people know about it, and to be honest, I was never planning on sharing it publicly. But after what I discovered recently, I feel like I need to get this out there. Maybe someone reading this has seen the same thing. It was the summer of 2002. I was 19, home from my freshman year of college, working a summer job at the local hardware store in our small Oklahoma town near Highway 20 East. My buddy Mike, not his real name, and I would often drive around after our shifts, just killing time like bored teenagers do in small towns. That night was exceptionally bright, one of those nights where the moon is so full and clear that you can see everything almost like it's daytime, just with that silvery blue tint to everything. We'd been driving around for hours, just talking about college and girls and whatever else came to mind. Around 11:30 or so, we ended up at Jumper Cemetery. I know how that sounds, dumb kids hanging out in a cemetery at night. But honestly, it wasn't about trying to scare ourselves or anything stupid like that. Jumper Cemetery was just a quiet spot off Highway 20 where we could park without being bothered. It's small, maybe an acre total, surrounded by woods on 3 sides, with that old wrought iron fence that's only about 4 feet high. From where we parked, facing the entrance, you could see most of the cemetery, weathered headstones, a few family plots, and this massive oak tree right in the center. We were just sitting there with the windows down, engine off, listening to some music at low volume. The night was warm, but not uncomfortable, with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. We'd been there maybe 15 minutes when we heard something moving through the brush from the direction of town on the west side of the cemetery. "Probably deer," Mike said, turning down the radio. We both watched that area, expecting to see a small herd emerge from the tree line. What happened next? I still struggle to process it, even after all these years. From the bottom of the hollow on the west side, something emerged. At first, in the moonlight, my brain tried to make sense of it. It was large, much larger than a deer, and it was walking upright. My first thought was that someone was playing a prank, maybe some guy in a costume, but that thought vanished instantly when I saw how it moved. This thing, this creature, walked with this fluid, natural motion that couldn't be faked. It was tall, incredibly tall, and covered in what looked like hair or fur that appeared stark white in the moonlight, not grey or silver, pure white. It walked directly toward the cemetery fence. "What the fuck is that?" Mike whispered, his voice trembling. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up completely. We both sat frozen, watching as this thing approached the 4-foot fence that surrounded the cemetery. It didn't climb the fence. It simply stepped over it, just lifted one long leg and stepped over like it was nothing more than a curb. That's when the reality of its size really hit me. This thing had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Once inside the cemetery, it walked with purpose, heading straight toward that big central oak tree. As it got closer to the tree, I could see its silhouette clearly against the trunk. Its head nearly touched the lowest branch, which had to be at least 9 feet up. The whole time, neither Mike nor I made a sound. I don't think we were even breathing. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard they went numb, even though the car wasn't running. Then it happened. The thing turned its head in our direction. I couldn't make out facial features from that distance, but I knew without a doubt that it had seen us. There was this moment, just a second or two, where it seemed to pause and consider us. That's when the smell hit us. The windows were down, and suddenly the car filled with this overwhelming stench. Like rotting meat, wet dog, and something musky I can't even describe. It was so bad my eyes watered. Mike actually gagged beside me. The creature changed direction immediately. It quickened its pace, not quite running, but moving with alarming speed, heading toward the southern border of the cemetery. Just like before, it simply stepped over the fence and disappeared into the trees. We heard it crashing through the underbrush for several seconds afterward. Loud snapping sounds as branches broke under its weight. No animal I know moves through woods making that much noise. For maybe 30 seconds after it disappeared, neither of us moved or spoke. Then Mike broke the silence. "Start the fucking car," he said in a voice I barely recognized. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. We tore out of there, not even bothering to turn the headlights on until we hit the highway. We drove straight back to town, doing 70 the whole way. When we finally felt safe enough to stop at a gas station, I noticed the smell was still with us, clinging to our clothes, in our hair. That terrible, unmistakable odor. We ended up buying air fresheners and hanging them from the rearview mirror, but it took days for that smell to completely leave the car. Here's the thing I've struggled with ever since that night. What we saw wasn't a bear standing up. It wasn't a guy in a suit. The proportions were wrong. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, and its movements were too fluid, too natural. And bears don't just step over 4-foot fences like they're nothing. For years afterward, I told myself, maybe it was some weird light trick combined with a regular animal. My logical mind kept trying to find explanations because the alternative was too unsettling. But deep down, I knew. I never talked about it. Neither did Mike. We actually stopped hanging out not long after that night. I think seeing it together made it worse somehow, like we couldn't look at each other without being reminded. Fast forward to 2017. I was teaching high school science in Kenwood, in western central Delaware County. One evening, I was grading papers and mindlessly scrolling through videos online when something stopped me cold. It was a video recreation of a Bigfoot sighting near Fayetteville, Arkansas. According to the caption, several witnesses had reported seeing a white Sasquatch crossing a field near a wooded area. The recreation showed exactly what Mike and I had seen 15 years earlier, the same height, the same fluid movement, the same stark white coloring. My hands were shaking as I read through the comments. Several people mentioned other white Bigfoot sightings in Oklahoma and Arkansas. Some called it the ghost Bigfoot or white walker. Whatever name they gave it, they were describing the same creature. That video gave me the courage to finally mention what I'd seen to some of the older folks around Kenwood. I was careful about it, just casually asking if they'd ever heard stories about strange things in the woods around Highway 20. To my shock, 3 different people, all over 70 years old, told me they'd either seen or knew someone who had seen a white creature matching the exact description. One old-timer said his father had encountered it in the 1950s while hunting. Another woman said her brother had seen it cross Highway 20 in the early 70s and had driven into a ditch trying to avoid it. All of them had kept quiet about it for the same reason I had, fear of ridicule. And all of them described the same terrible smell. The most chilling conversation was with an elderly Cherokee man who lived just outside town. When I hesitantly described what I'd seen, his expression changed immediately. He told me that in their stories, white creatures like that weren't just animals. They existed in both our world and the spirit world. According to him, seeing one was extremely rare and usually meant something significant was about to happen in your life. "Did something big happen to you after?" he asked me. The question hit me hard because yes, something had. Just 2 months after that night at Jumper Cemetery, my father had died unexpectedly of a heart attack. I had never connected the two events until that moment. I've spent countless hours researching since then. There are documented sightings of white Bigfoot-like creatures going back decades across Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. They're much rarer than the typical brown or black ones people report, and almost always described as larger. The research hasn't made what I saw any less terrifying. If anything, knowing others have seen it makes it more real, not less. Sometimes, I still wake up at night thinking I can smell that distinctive odor in my room. What bothers me most isn't just that I saw something that shouldn't exist. It's that this thing moved with purpose. It wasn't just wandering randomly. It was heading specifically toward that tree and only diverted when it noticed us, like it had business there. I've never been back to Jumper Cemetery, not even in daylight. But I've looked at it on maps, and from aerial views you can see that central oak tree clearly. It's massive, probably hundreds of years old. I've often wondered what was so important about that specific tree. Sometimes I think about driving back there to look at that tree up close, to see if there's anything unusual about it. But honestly, I don't think I'll ever have the courage. What if it's still there? What if it recognizes me? I know how all this sounds. If you've read this far, you probably think I'm making it up or that I saw a bear or a guy in a costume. That's okay. I've spent 20 years telling myself the same things, but I know what I saw. I know how it moved. I know how it smelled. And I know that my eyes and brain were registering something they couldn't fully process. The human mind tries to categorize things. When it sees something it can't categorize, it either forces it into a familiar box or kind of glitches. That's the best way I can describe what happened to me that night. My mind glitched. It couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. But the memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's become clearer over time. I can still see that white figure stepping over the fence as easily as you'd step over a crack in the sidewalk. I can still feel the primal fear that froze me in place, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch that smell again, just a whiff of it, and my entire body goes cold. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it was there. But I know what I saw at Jumper Cemetery that night was real, and I know I'm not the only one who's seen it. Story 14. This happened in March of 2020, just before the whole pandemic lockdown hit. My mother, my 2 younger brothers, Carlos and Miguel, my sister Elena, and my 3 kids, Jesus, Sophia, and Diego, were returning from my aunt's birthday celebration in the next county over. It was late, between 2 and 3 in the morning. We'd stayed way longer than planned because my aunt insisted we eat more food, have more cake, and the kids were having so much fun with their cousins that I didn't have the heart to tear them away earlier. The drive back home was about 45 minutes along Highway 63. If you're not familiar with it, it's a winding dirt road that cuts through heavily forested areas. At that time, it was actually pretty well maintained for a dirt road. The county had graded it recently. But it has these constant curves and hills that make driving at night a real challenge. I was driving our family's old Suburban. My mom was in the passenger seat, my sister and brothers were in the middle row, and my 3 kids were squeezed into the back. Everyone except my mom and me were half asleep. The heat was blasting because it was freezing that night, and the windows were starting to fog a little around the edges. We were about 30 minutes into our drive home. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, volume low. My mom and I were quietly chatting about the party, both of us tired but alert. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, catching the occasional reflective eyes of small animals in the brush beside the road. We had just crested one of the bigger hills, one of those where you get that little drop in your stomach when you go over it too fast. When I had to slow down a bit for the small bridge at the bottom. This bridge crosses over a narrow creek that feeds into the larger river in our county. It's not much, just a concrete span maybe 30 feet across with metal railings. As we approached, Something caught in our headlights. At first I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a deer frozen in place, but then we got closer. I'll never forget what I saw on that bridge. Standing there, rigid against the railing, was, I don't even know what to call it. A creature, a being. It was tall, easily 6 or 7 feet, with long, shaggy brown hair covering most of its body. The hair wasn't black like you sometimes hear about in these stories. It was more like a reddish brown, similar to an Irish setter dog, kind of waving slightly in the breeze. But it wasn't the hair that haunts me, it was the face. Jesus, that face. It looked so human, but wrong. The eyes and nose area had less hair, almost like it was worn away, and I could see wrinkles around the eyes. It looked like an old man's face, but attached to this massive, hairy body. And there was no neck. The head just sat directly on these massive shoulders. The proportions were all wrong for a human, but the face was too human-like to be an animal. When our headlights hit it, the thing froze. I swear it looked surprised, like it wasn't expecting to see a vehicle at that hour. Its eyes reflected our headlights briefly, not like an animal's eyes do, but in a different way that I can't explain. More aware, more intelligent. I didn't slow down much. We were probably still going about 50 miles per hour, but time seemed to stretch out in that moment. I felt like I was seeing it in slow motion as we crossed the bridge. It stood completely still, pressed against the metal railing as if trying to make itself smaller, which was impossible given its size. As we passed by, my mum gasped and grabbed my arm so hard she left marks. "¿Qué es eso?" she whispered, which just means, "What is that?" in Spanish. I couldn't answer her. I had no idea. The second we were across the bridge, my sister Eleanor, who had been dozing, suddenly sat up straight. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. My brothers were now wide awake too, both pressed against the windows looking back. "Mom, turn around!" Diego, my 10-year-old, called from the back seat. He and his siblings had all seen it too. "What was that thing? It looked like a monster." "No," I said firmly, gripping the steering wheel tighter and pressing down on the accelerator. "We're not turning around." "But what was it?" Carlos asked. He was 17 then, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the edge in his voice. "Probably just a bear," I said automatically, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew that was wrong. I've seen bears many times. We live in an area where black bears are common. That was no bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have faces like old men. "That wasn't a bear," Miguel said quietly. He was 15 and the most analytical of my brothers. "Bears don't look like that. That looked like a man, but way too big." My mother crossed herself and started praying quietly in Spanish. The kids in the back were whispering to each other, their voices rising with excitement and fear. "Everyone calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It was dark, we were moving fast. It was probably just something normal that looked strange in the headlights. But I couldn't convince myself, let alone them. What we'd seen wasn't normal. It wasn't anything I could explain. The rest of the drive home was tense and quiet, broken only by occasional theories from the kids and my brothers. My mother didn't speak again until we pulled into our driveway. That night, none of us slept well. I kept the kids in my room. All of us piled onto my bed. They eventually drifted off, but I stayed awake, replaying that moment on the bridge over and over in my mind. The next morning, over breakfast, we talked about it more. That's when I realized something unsettling. All 7 of us had seen the same thing. 7 different people, different ages, from different positions in the car, and we all described the exact same creature. The height, the reddish-brown hair, the wrinkled face with less hair around the eyes and nose, the way it stood, the lack of a neck. Every detail matched in our descriptions. My brother Miguel suggested we look online to see if anyone else had reported something similar in our area. That's when we first came across terms like Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Until then, None of us had ever really paid attention to those stories. We'd vaguely heard of them, of course, but they weren't part of our cultural background, and we'd never given them any thought. What shocked us was how many of the descriptions matched what we'd seen. The height, the hair, even the surprisingly human-like face that some witnesses reported. But there were differences too. Most reports described these creatures as having black or dark brown hair, not the reddish brown we saw, and many described a strong smell, which we didn't notice, though we were in a closed car moving quickly. Carlos wanted to go back to the bridge in daylight to look for footprints or hair, but I refused. Something about the whole experience felt wrong, dangerous somehow. I didn't want any of us going near that bridge again. For weeks afterward, we were all jumpy. The kids wouldn't sleep alone. My mother hung extra religious symbols around the house. My brothers kept looking out the windows at night. My sister Elena started having nightmares. What bothers me most, even now, is that I can't explain it. I've tried to rationalize it 1,000 different ways. Was it a man in a costume? But who would be standing on a remote bridge at 3 in the morning wearing something like that? A bear standing oddly. But that face was too human-like. Some kind of large escaped primate from somewhere. But the face was too wrinkled, too old. I've never believed in monsters or supernatural things. I'm a practical person, a mother of 3 who works as a nurse. I deal in reality. But that night, I saw something I can't explain. Something that doesn't fit into my understanding of the world. And 6 other people in my family saw it too. We don't talk about it much anymore. The pandemic hit shortly after, and somehow that global crisis made our bridge encounter seem less important. Life went on, but sometimes, when I'm driving at night and approach a bridge or a dark patch of road, my hands start to shake. I find myself scanning the roadside, half expecting to see that figure again. I've heard people in town mention strange sounds in the woods sometimes. Knocking noises, branches breaking when no one's around. A cousin of mine who hunts says he found unusually large footprints last fall near the same creek that runs under that bridge. I pretend I'm not interested when these stories come up. What troubles me most is the eyes. In that brief moment when our headlights illuminated it, I saw intelligence there, recognition, surprise. Whatever it wasn't just an animal operating on instinct. There was a mind behind those eyes, processing, thinking, maybe even feeling fear just as we were. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, walking those woods at night, if it has a family, a community, if it tells stories about the humans it's encountered, if it remembers us just as clearly as we remember it. I've never reported this officially. Who would I even tell? The local police would think we were crazy or playing a prank. Scientists would want evidence we don't have. So we've kept it mostly to ourselves, this strange shared experience that none of us can explain. I'm sharing it now because I need to know if anyone else has seen something similar. Especially in our area, especially with that distinctive reddish-brown hair and that wrinkled old man face. I need to know if we're alone in this experience or if others have glimpsed whatever it is that lives in those woods. Sometimes I think about turning around, about what would have happened if I'd done what the kids asked and gone back to the bridge that night. Would it still have been there? Would we have seen it more clearly? Or would something worse have happened? I don't regret my decision to keep driving. When you're a mother, your first instinct is always to protect your children, and everything inside me was screaming danger. Not necessarily that the creature itself meant us harm, I didn't get that impression, but that this was something humans weren't meant to encounter, weren't equipped to understand. 2 years later, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. 7 witnesses, 7 family members who saw the same impossible thing. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was a shared hallucination, a trick of the light, a bear that just looked strange from our angle. But then I remember that face, those eyes, the way it pressed itself against the railing as we passed, the intelligence and surprise I saw there. And I know what we saw was real. I just don't know what it was, and I'm not sure I want to know. Story 15. I've never told this story online before. I barely talk about it with anyone, even after all these years. What happened to me in the summer of 1977 still gives me nightmares sometimes. I'm 58 years old now, but I still sleep with a nightlight. My husband thinks it's cute, but he doesn't understand. Nobody does except for Jenny, and I haven't spoken to her since high school. I was 12 that summer. My parents had just gotten me braces, the full metal contraption with headgear I had to wear at night. I hated them. They made me feel even more awkward than I already was at that age. But that's not what this story is about. Our church, Bethel Baptist, organized this summer retreat to Roberts Cave State Park near Wilburton, Oklahoma. My parents thought it would be good for me to spend time with other kids my age, especially since I was pretty shy. The retreat was supposed to last 3 days, but I only made it through 1. We arrived at the park on a Saturday morning. It was hot and humid, typical Oklahoma summer weather. There were about 30 kids total, split between boys and girls, along with Pastor Mike and 5 parent chaperones. The boys' cabin was on one side of the camping area, and the girls' cabin was on the other. Our cabin was horseshoe-shaped with bunks lining the walls and a common area in the middle. I got assigned a top bunk near the back, with Jenny Miller on the bottom bunk below me. From the moment we arrived, something felt off. While everyone was unpacking and claiming beds, I kept getting this weird sensation like someone was watching me. I'd look around, but all I'd see were the other girls chattering away. I tried to shake it off, figuring it was just nerves from being away from home. That morning, we went hiking along the trails. The park was beautiful with its thick forest and limestone caves, but I couldn't enjoy it. Every time we'd pass a densely wooded area, I'd feel those eyes on me again. At one point, I thought I saw something move between the trees, something big and dark, but when I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. During lunch at the picnic area, Mrs. Thompson, one of the chaperones, mentioned that some of the trash cans had been knocked over overnight. Pastor Mike joked about raccoons, but Mr. Davis, who was helping cook hamburgers, said he'd found some strange footprints that were way too big for raccoons. Probably just some teenagers messing around, Pastor Mike said, but I noticed he looked uneasy. That afternoon, we had free time. Most kids went swimming in the lake, but I stayed back at the cabin with a few others. I was sitting on the cabin steps reading when I caught a whiff of something awful, like rotten meat mixed with wet dog. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I looked around to see if someone had played a prank with something dead, but there was nothing. The smell disappeared as quickly as it came. By dinner time, I was seriously on edge. I didn't want to seem like a baby, so I didn't say anything, but I was starting to regret coming on this trip. The adults must have noticed something was wrong because Mrs. Thompson asked if I was feeling okay. Just a little homesick, I lied. After dinner, we had a campfire with songs and Bible stories. The sky was getting darker with clouds rolling in. Pastor Mike said there might be a storm coming and we should all get to bed early just in case. Back in the cabin, getting ready for bed was chaos. 15 girls trying to change and brush their teeth in a small space. I put on my pajamas and my stupid headgear, which hooked onto my braces and wrapped around the back of my head with a strap. I climbed up to my bunk and tried to get comfortable. Around 10 o'clock, the storm hit. Rain pounded on the roof and wind howled through the trees. Lightning flashed through the windows, followed by loud thunder that shook the cabin. Most of the girls fell asleep despite the noise, but I couldn't. That feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, when I heard the screen door open and slam shut over the sound of the storm. I figured it was one of the parent chaperones checking on us, but then I smelled it again, that awful, rotting smell. And I heard footsteps. Heavy, shuffling footsteps that didn't sound like any of our chaperones. The footsteps moved slowly through the cabin, past the bunks where the other girls were sleeping. Nobody else seemed to hear them. I wanted to turn around to look, but I was frozen with fear. The footsteps got closer and closer to my bunk until they stopped right behind me. I could hear breathing, deep, raspy breathing, and a soft growl that made the hair on my arms stand up. Whatever was standing there was tall, much taller than any adult I knew. I could sense it looming over me, which should have been impossible since I was on the top bunk. The bunk beds were maybe 5.5 feet tall, and this thing was standing over me. Then I felt it. Something large and furry touched my face. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. The furry hand or paw or whatever it was traced along my headgear, almost like it was curious about what was on my head. Its touch was surprisingly gentle, but its fingers were massive, easily wrapping around the back of my head. The smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water and my stomach turn. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to go away, praying for someone to wake up and see what was happening. But everyone else seemed dead to the world. I don't know how long it stood there, touching my headgear and breathing that hot, rancid breath on me. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, another loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, and the thing made a low, rumbling sound deep in its chest. I felt its weight shift, and the footsteps shuffled away toward the door. The screen door opened and slammed again. I still couldn't move. I lay there, tears streaming down my face, too terrified to even look around. Eventually, I must have passed out from fear, because the next thing I remember was waking up on the cabin floor beside my bunk. It was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. The storm had passed. I was on the floor, still in my pajamas and headgear, with no memory of how I got there. My first thought was that I'd fallen out of bed during the night, but something felt wrong. My headgear was twisted, and there was a strange, dark smudge on the strap, like dirt, but oilier. Jenny was sitting on her bottom bunk, staring at me with wide eyes. Her face was pale, and she looked like she hadn't slept at all. "Did you see it?" she whispered. My blood ran cold. "See what?" She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in close. "The thing that was standing behind you last night." I felt sick. "You saw it?" She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "It was big and black and hairy. It was touching your face. I wanted to scream, but I was scared it would kill me if I did. I'm sorry, Samantha. I should have done something." I couldn't process what she was saying. Part of me had hoped it was just a nightmare, but Jenny had seen it too. It was real. "What was it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head. "I don't know. It wasn't human, though. It was like a giant ape, but it stood like a person, and its eyes..." She shuddered. "Its eyes were looking right at me for a second. They knew I was awake." Before we could talk more, Mrs. Thompson came in to wake everyone up for breakfast. Jenny grabbed my arm. "We can't tell anyone," she said urgently. "They won't believe us. They'll think we're making it up." I nodded, still in shock. "Okay, we won't tell." We made a pact right then and there to never speak of what happened. But as we were getting dressed, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. Large, muddy footprints leading from the door to where my bunk was and back again. They weren't human footprints. They were massive, at least 15 inches long, with what looked like 5 toes but shaped all wrong. Mrs. Thompson noticed them too and frowned. "Which one of you tracked all this mud in? We just cleaned this floor yesterday." Nobody answered. The other girls looked confused, staring at the footprints. They were too big to belong to any of us. At breakfast, I couldn't eat. I kept seeing that thing standing over me, feeling its furry hand on my face. Jenny looked just as bad as I felt. We sat together, barely touching our food. Pastor Mike came over to check on us. "You girls okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jenny kicked me under the table, a warning not to say anything. "I don't feel well," I said. It wasn't a lie. "I think I want to go home." Pastor Mike felt my forehead. "You do look pale. Maybe you caught something. I'll call your parents after breakfast." By noon, my mom had arrived to pick me up. I didn't care that the other kids probably thought I was a baby for going home early. I just wanted to be as far away from that place as possible. In the car, Mom asked what happened. "I just got sick," I told her. "Probably something I ate." She seemed to accept that, though she kept glancing at me with concern. I must have looked terrible. I hadn't slept, and I was still trembling. When we got home, I took a shower, scrubbing my skin raw, trying to get rid of the feeling of that thing's touch and the smell that seemed to cling to me. Afterward, I found 3 long, coarse black hairs stuck in my headgear, hairs that were neither mine nor Jenny's. I flushed them down the toilet before anyone could see them. That night, I begged to sleep in my parents' room. I told them I was still feeling sick and scared from being away. They let me, probably thinking I was just being a dramatic tween. I didn't care. I needed to be around people, around light. Jenny called the next day. The rest of the retreat had been cut short. Apparently, something had broken into the food storage overnight and destroyed everything. Pastor Mike had decided it wasn't safe to stay with no food and reports of vandals in the area. But Jenny and I knew better. It wasn't vandals. We kept our pack through middle school and high school. We never told anyone what we'd seen that night. We didn't even discuss it much between ourselves after a while. It was too scary to think about. Years later, when I was in college, I stumbled across an article about Bigfoot sightings in Oklahoma. There was a section specifically about Roberts Cave State Park and multiple accounts of encounters there in the 70s. One account described exactly what had happened to us. The smell, the curiosity about human objects, the gentleness despite its terrifying appearance. I've since done a lot of research on Sasquatch encounters. There are countless stories similar to mine all across North America. I don't know what that thing was that visited me that night, but I know what I experienced. I know what Jenny saw, and I know those footprints were real. I broke our pact a few years ago and tried to contact Jenny to talk about it. I found out she'd moved to Alaska, about as far from Oklahoma as you can get. Her mom told me Jenny has never liked camping or even being near forests since that summer. I don't blame her. I'm the same way. My family knows I won't go camping, ever. I've made up excuses over the years. Allergies, bad back, whatever works. The truth is, I can't be in the woods at night. I can't sleep in a cabin or tent, because every time I close my eyes in a place like that, I feel that furry hand on my face again, gentle but terrifying, and I smell that awful smell. And sometimes, even in my suburban home with the doors locked and the security system on, I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like something large is standing over me, breathing softly, watching me with curious eyes. And I wonder if it's still out there, remembering the little girl with the strange metal contraption on her head, and if someday it might come looking for me again.